So this is our first guest lecture. Yes, if you want to take notes, you more than welcome can take notes. There will not be a quiz, but there will be an activity in the middle. So if you do want to take notes about the first part that Mark is going to present, we will have a little activity for y'all to practice some bioarchaeology skills. So I believe in you, Ash. It'll be, Mark will help us all through it because it's been a while since I've studied some of this. So today we're going to do, Mark is going to give us a lecture on the basics of the field of bioarchaeology, going over what bioarchaeology is, some of the different things. Yes, so if, as Mark put up, there is a resources. So if you go to the second Google Drive link, Mark has provided some resources on bioarchaeology and some papers, including some of the things that you'll need for the activity, which will be halfway through our lecture. After Mark presents his lecture, I will take a little break, do the activity, chat a little bit, answer some questions, and then I'm going to be presenting on a recent paper that was just released that is kind of bioarchaeology, but is also talking about the also new and incoming field of mummy studies. And so we're going to look at the recent CT scans of Amenhotep I, and kind of talk our way through with Mark giving us some more insight into some of the results that they came up with. There is a trigger warning. We will be talking and looking at images of human remains, mummified remains, skeletal remains. Understanding if you are a little uncomfortable with that, feel free to just listen to the lecture. They will be on every single slide, essentially. So just be warned. And there should be a timer for a trigger warning, but it does not seem to be coming up. So while Mark is talking, I might try to fix that, just try to see if it comes up so everyone can be aware when they come in. All right, you ready, Mark?
Yep, ready when you are.
Okay, so give me a second.
I will ask, anytime there are skeletal pictures, please refrain from taking any pictures also.
Good point as well.
Because we don't want pictures like that out there just in case.
Yep. Okay. Oh, it worked. Oh, it worked. Thank God. I tried so hard on this. Okay. While Mark goes, I will be adjusting some things so my chin isn't cut off. But Mark, feel free to go. And also let us know if there's any audio problems. But Mark, you are free to proceed.
Okay, so like I said, there's like an 18-second lag, so I don't see it until like 18 seconds later.
Yes, and
okay.
Everyone just understand there is a lag, and I have the PowerPoint on, and he's watching the stream, so just let me know whenever you see it, and that's fine.
Okay, so I will go ahead and give you like a quick rundown of who I am. So my name is Mark. I did my undergraduate at Ohio University in Ohio, Athens, Ohio, in anthropology, specializing in biological anthropology, which I will talk a little bit more about in like 2 slides. And I just turned in my dissertation at the University of York doing bioarchaeology this past September, looking at isotopes and focusing on diet and weaning in Bronze Age Spain. So this talk is going to be specifically about bioarchaeology, just to give you a taster of it, and then hopefully in the future introduce a little bit more aspects of specifically what I do with my dissertation, hopefully. Next slide, please. So, as Melissa has said, there will be pictures of human remains. They are skeletonized and they will be mummified whenever we get into the second part of the lecture. So if you do not like this, then you can turn away from the screen and just listen to the lecture, or kindly exit the lecture. And again, please do not take any pictures because it's ethical guidelines of posting stuff like this on social media. So just refrain from doing that, please. Okay, next. Let me know when you did it also.
I did it.
Okay. Okay, so this is gonna be so strange. So in bioarchaeology, so bioarchaeology comes within the field of anthropology in the United States. So anthropology is a study of the human condition, both past and present. So in anthropology, we have the four subfields. We have social, which is going to be in the top left picture. That one's focusing on living humans, focusing on their religions, social structure, etc. And then we have linguistics, which is on the right, and that's looking at how languages have evolved through time, and a lot of them are trying to find ways to limit the destruction of languages, because a lot of languages are sadly dying out. And then we have archaeology, which everyone in here should know about because of Melissa. So that's looking at the artifacts that are discovered during excavations and learning about the past through these artifacts. And then finally, we have biological anthropology, which looks at the entirety of human evolution and the human condition, both skeletally and through our primate ancestors. So within anthropology, there's also technically a fifth field, which some people agree with, some don't. It's applied anthropology, which brings in pretty much any of the subfields and uses it from a, I guess, humanistic aspect and trying to deal with issues today. Okay, next slide, please.
Just one quick question from Ash. Would how they make fire fall under culture for anthropology? Kind of looking at how humans, I think, evolved to learn how to make fire.
So whenever it comes to something like that, you could actually, so my subfield technically focuses on biocultural anthropology. So I use both biological, archaeological, and cultural aspects of humans in the past. So that one can actually fall within archaeology because of how it was created, how it was made, by using stone tools to make them, by using stick and twine to make it. Could be the biological aspect, by why did they start making fire? Did it help them to cook their meals, which eventually it helped us to evolve into lesser large molars, so the back of their teeth. So really that can fall into any of the three main categories.
And I think that's a very universal question with anthropology, is that a lot of things can fall into a lot of the different categories. And yeah, kids, definitely. Very good point. Some of these are not yes or no questions. It is very fluid. I think most social sciences are. They can be.
And that's also one of the more difficult things about especially archaeology, is that so many of us are interested in so many different things, which is what makes our field so amazing. Yeah. That my specialty can range anywhere from ancient Egypt, which is where I originally started with archaeology, all the way up through the Renaissance.
Yeah, it's definitely
like it all.
You can and it's a different way. There's lots of different ways to get into it. Like, you have picked a topic in which you can put that to any different culture or any different time period, but I have kind of gone the way where I've picked a time period, and even in some cases I now have to go and pick a specific topic. So now I could be a bioarchaeologist Egyptologist, where I could take that one step further and go even more specialized. So there's a bajillion different ways to go around and find out what you're really interested in and find that kind of niche within anthropology and archaeology especially.
Which later on, for the second half of the lecture, whenever Melissa's talking about the mummy paper that she wants to discuss, I might also bring in a little bit of a bioarchaeological aspect of some Egyptology to show different aspects of what we can do with different methods in bioarchaeology. For instance, isotopes.
For sure.
Within the realm of Egypt, because there's so much we can do throughout the world that no one's even touched on.
Yeah, definitely. All right.
And also, there is no dumb question. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Ask the question, because if you have it, someone else might have the same question.
Yes, 100%. All right, I switched the slide.
Okay, so this, again, human remains and a horse remain on the right-hand side. I'm pretty sure it's a horse.
Yeah,
so
looks like a horse.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm not a zoo archaeologist.
It could be a horse, it could be a mule, but it's definitely
Yeah.
equine somewhere
Yeah.
along that lines.
So with bioarchaeology, there are two different sects. So we have the United States American sect of bioarchaeology, and then you have the UK/European sect of bioarchaeology. Within the UK European one, bioarchaeology includes both human remains, animal remains, plant remains, anything that's organic and that was once living. They combine all into bioarchaeology. However, in the US, with Jane Dykstra in 1977, Jane Dykstra is the leading bioarchaeologist in the United States. She is based out of Arizona State University. She changed the term to be just human remains. So in the US, we have everything separated. There's bioarchaeology with human remains. There's zooarchaeology with animal remains. You have paleobotany with plants, etc. So there's huge differences when it comes to bioarchaeology and how it's practiced around the world. Next.
Switched it.
Okay, so within bioarchaeology, as I was just saying, and this is again from the European aspect since I did my master's here, we have multiple different methods and specialties that people can practice in. So starting with the first left picture and going clockwise. So that one is going to be ancient DNA. So what a lot of people do with that is they'll look at DNA from human skeletal remains or plant remains to track evolution and how evolution has changed the DNA structure of humans, plants, animals, etc., and how humans have worked within that evolutionary chain. The next picture is my specialty, which is stable isotopes. So what I would do with that is I would take a portion of tooth or bone, and then I would look at nitrogen, carbon, strontium, and oxygen to look at where someone was from, what they were eating, when they were weaned, which is my specialty for my master's, and the seasonality of whenever they were alive. The next one is paleoproteomics, which is a newer up-and-coming field that focuses on trying to identify specific species within the, I guess, molecular aspect. So there's a lecturer/professor at the University of York, that's her specialty, and she uses dental calculus, which I will talk about later on. And she helps to identify what specifically someone was eating, because with stable isotopes, I can't tell you this is exactly what they were eating. I can tell you that they were eating more protein or less protein. I can tell you if they're eating aquatic animals or not. She can tell you exactly what species they were eating.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And that's something I could never do. Too much science for me, even.
Too much.
And then the next picture is going to be residue analysis. So with this, we also have all of these, we actually have specialists at my university. This one is where they are taking part of an artifact and putting it through a mass spectrometer to look at what was the artifact being used for. So with this one, I can't tell, it looks like a rock, I think.
It's either pottery or like it could be a weird thing of iron. That's really dirty. I can't tell.
Yeah, you can't tell with this picture. So for instance, okay, so pottery, you can take the pottery shard and you can take the inside of the pottery and you can actually learn about what that pottery was being used for, if it was being used for grain or wine. Oliver Craig, who's with my department, he actually did it with some pottery from Pompeii. And he was able to tell that it was wine being stored in it.
A great example of that is a guy, and I'm not even joking, and I did this as a Fun Fact Friday episode. The man who invented the Xbox gaming console, he is a mock, like, archaeologist and kind of not bioarchaeologist in the sense, I can't remember what the weird specialty is, but he worked on a project where he obtained bread molds from, I believe it was the Harvard Museum and the MFA in Boston, and he was able to extract grain, or pretty much yeast, from like the residue in the pottery, and then he bloomed the yeast, and then he made ancient Egyptian bread in his apartment.
Yeah, so that's actually being used a lot.
Insane.
So if I'm not mistaken, I can't remember where it's from, but they were actually able to reconstruct beer recipes doing the same exact method.
Yeah.
They're able to tell exactly what was in the recipe, and they've been able to reconstruct it, which is what we call experimental archaeology.
I love experimental archaeology. I feel like
I've never done it.
I very much like, I don't know if I'd do it like full time, but the one thing that I very, very much want to do is I want to make my own kiln in the back of my house, so I can, and that's not even an experimental archaeology, that's just really, I don't want to have to buy a kiln, so I'm like, I could figure out how the ancients fired their pottery, and I could figure that out, and that's like, I would very much like to try that.
Do it.
I would. One question from Diggy Prime was Cheddar Man in the UK. I'm assuming he's referencing the buried remains. Is he called the Cheddar Man?
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, he's from, I think, where's cheddar made from? It's somewhere in the UK.
Somewhere in the UK.
Yeah, because there was a lot of fluffle, I guess you want to say, about it, because they found out that he was actually black.
I remember
and
this
it made
guy.
a lot of,
I was about to say,
it made a lot of neo-Nazis very, very upset.
I remember this. I actually, I think I watched a mini documentary about this.
What was he asking?
Okay. Other question. There's some people were talking about would you find like this in excrement and like dung? I think that was in reference to the different types of food, like finding out how people ate.
So sometimes with coprolites, which is fossilized poop. We can tell what someone was eating by doing more chemistry and looking at what was within the dung, and we can also use it to look at parasites, so we call that paleoparasitology.
Wow.
Which is something I can never do because that just sounds disgusting. Personally.
I don't... There are people who test... in the past, I don't think that we do it now in mummy studies, but there are people who would test what was found in stomachs, either inside the mummy or if it was in a canopic jar, and they would like test like what types of food were in the stomachs, and I was like, I don't think I could do that. I have a very, very strong stomach, but when it comes to literally the stomach, I don't think you could pay me to do that. And yeah, I think we answered Diggy Prime.
Yeah. Could be it. Okay, while Melissa's looking at other questions. And then the last one, the last picture, which is the human skeletal remains, I actually took that picture myself. And that is from my excavation that I did in Tuscany back in 2016. So this one is what we call osteoarchaeology, which is literally just a study of the human remains and looking at their biological profile, which I will teach you how to do later, and looking at diseases and pathologies and trauma that the skeleton might have, and looking at trends.
All right. And yeah, Diggy Prime's like, have you heard about the guy who found the old German beer and made it from yeast findings in a barrel? I'm like, yeah, I think that like literally we've heard different versions of that, of the making yeast or making wine. And the bread one is a weird, interesting one because literally they did a scientific study on it, but then this guy literally just took a little bit of the yeast home and just made it in his kitchen. Like, that was like the weird part about this. And he pretty much just went on a viral tweet thread. He just tweeted all of the different processes he was doing, and everyone was like, wait a second, did you just like make ancient Egyptian bread in your apartment? And he was like, yeah. And it was very strange, but very, very cool. All right.
Okay, so yeah, so like I just said, I'm going to teach you how to build a biological profile, because you'll have to do this for the exercise, but this one you will not have to do because it's impossible without having the bone in front of you. So the first one is what we do is we'll look at sex, age, and then stature, and then we can estimate based off of that the demography of a site or a cemetery. And I will be teaching you all this now. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is my favorite one to actually teach about because this is the one that I'm like the best at. So sex estimation using the skull. So there are multiple different points on the skull that you can actually use to estimate sex. The one that I like the most is one that females will not have most likely, but males will have, and I'm sure Melissa knows which one I'm talking about.
I'm circling it with my mouse.
The back of your head, you have a little knot called the nuchal crest. So if you go to the back of your head, you can actually feel a small bump if you're a male. If you're a female, you likely won't feel one. And I actually play with mine because it's just fun. And in the resources sheet, if someone wants to pull up the resources, you can actually look at it and you can tell you can estimate the sex based off of the nuchal crest. If it's a hook shape, then it is a male. If it is smooth, it's a female, because females are typically
here we go.
Very gracile.
I'm pulling it up.
Yeah, it came up, yeah.
I know. I was about to say, like, I know I'm not finding it, but I do have a very severe divot that goes down there, and I can't tell if it's, like, my skull or something else. How do I... Let's zoom in on this.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can't really zoom in with the PowerPoint, sadly, that well.
That's okay.
On the pictures
I'm now pulling up the sex one, and I'm zoomed in a lot, so hopefully people will be able to see.
So... the first one, I can't see because it's too small on my phone.
Oh, it's okay. So it's a nuchal crest, mastoid process.
Okay. So the first one, you have the nuchal crest. So what we do is we range it from 1 to 5, with 5 being the most male and 1 being the most female. So the problem with sex estimation is that there's a range. You can't really say for sure if someone is male or female sometimes because of how ambiguous some individuals are, especially when it comes to Asians. They typically have more gracile skeleton than, for instance, white people might have. That's just a very, very big stereotype, though. I'm saying that now. So whenever we're doing sex estimation, you might have someone who's in the middle, which is 3, but you can't tell what sex they are. So that's the nuchal crest with master process. It's the one right behind your ear. You might be able to feel it also, but it's
one quick question about the nuchal crest that Ash has is at what point does the nuchal crest become pronounced? Like, do children have them?
So your children will not have them yet. So what happens is whenever you are born, you actually start out with more than 300 bones in your body. And then throughout your life, those bones end up fusing to be 206 bones total, or approximately 206 bones total. So what happens is during development, different muscles, which is what the nuchal crest actually attaches to, it's to help pull up, like hold up your head. That those muscle attachments will strengthen and result in more pronounced or less pronounced marker. So from the age of when you're born all the way up until around 16 to 18, we typically try not to do sex estimation because of how ambiguous those people are because of puberty.
That makes sense.
So
good question,
if
Ash.
you come across that's something I didn't even think about mentioning is
there's so many different things in the
I could go this could be like sex estimation could be its own lecture.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So typically anything before you're around 18 years of age, we don't estimate sex. All right, so then under that you have the master process. So that's the one that's right behind the ear, and again, small, female, large, male, medium, who knows? The supraorbital margin is going to be right in your eyelid, so I suggest not actually doing it unless you want to hurt yourself. So if it's sharp, it's female. Rounded, male. This is stuff that you actually, it's better to have the skull with you in person because you can rub the inside and you can actually feel if it's sharp or not. The glabella, which is the fourth one, which is the supraorbital margin or ridge. Sorry, ridge. If it's straight up, which is like your forehead just going straight up, typically that's going to be a female. But if it slightly dips out and then up, that's going to be a male. And then finally, the mental eminence, which is going to be on your mandible or your jaw. If it's more squared, it's going to be a male. More rounded, it's going to be female.
Pretty cool.
Okay, is there any more questions?
Yeah, so over time, a lot of these, or over time meaning over the course of human history, these are going to become more vague. Like,
yes,
as people, as literally people continue to procreate, and I mean, it's evolution. The evolution will eventually make these markers more vague, and who knows, in a couple years we might have to redo all of these, because I'm assuming these are, have many of these changed since like the 1970s when bioarchaeology kind of first emerged? Are there more recent standards, I guess?
We've actually been studying skulls, which I'll actually talk about in a few slides, since the late 1800s, really. But whenever the early 1900s started, that's whenever it started to skyrocket with the founder of modern American archaeology or anthropology, which is Franz Boas. We can actually thank him for most of what we do today, but we can also thank him for other issues, which I will talk about later.
So many issues.
Yeah. And Ash is actually asking or mentioned a good question. I wonder if there's a correlation between people who feel more feminine and people who feel more male and having those indicators. So one of the topics I actually wanted to possibly do whenever I was looking at master's programs and PhD programs was looking at individuals who are transgendered to look at if they're starting to take their inhibitors or their testosterone, or like before the process has finished for puberty, if that would actually affect the shape of their bone and the indicators. But that's something that's next to impossible because they're still alive, unless you do CT scans, which we'll talk about later also.
CT scans have their own difficulties.
Yes, I can't do them.
No. I think it's so funny how, like, mummy studies and bioarchaeology should be exactly the same. They should be. They're along the same lines, but at the same time, for the majority of mummy studies, you're not working with physical bones. You might not even be working with a physical mummy. You are working with CT scans and x-rays. And it's just the difference in... It's not even the difference in preservation, essentially. It's just the difference in the tactics of the ancient Egyptians. Just that they just did it differently. It's just...
Yep.
They just made it harder for bioarchaeologists to learn more.
Which is something I can never... Again, that's something I haven't had experience with, because most of the programs I've been in, like my undergrad and now my master's, we didn't have a CT scan machine to be able to actually do it. We don't have X-ray machines that we can just put things through and look at it. But I've seen pictures of them, and I'm like, whenever you're looking at trauma, I can't look at the X-ray and be like, oh, there's the fracture. I've never been able to do that.
It's
I don't know how people can.
And yes, chickadees, the CT scans are extremely helpful in making 3D models. I don't know literally not the technology that it uses to convert it, but CT scans are almost already kind of 3D scans, especially if you get like a really good CT scan of a body, because that is essentially A CT scan is essentially an X-ray that goes all the way around because it's a giant thing that just loops and loops and loops. So they are used frequently for 3D models, although in general we don't have a lot of 3D models of mummies. There are some out there, but not as many.
So, Cade, you actually say, hey, can I have your body bones when you die? We actually do that, by the way.
We do that.
If you go to the body farm.
The body farm.
So the body farm is at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and they were the first body farm that was created back in, I believe it was 1983 or something like that.
Yeah, that's
by Bass and
Bass.
Company.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love Bill Bass. I had never met him, but
He sounds amazing. I've watched lots of documentaries. I read a book about the body farm, and I did have for a long time when I was taking forensic anthropology classes, I was pretty sure I was going to donate my body to the body farm.
I'm going to.
With some, I actually had an exception that I was like, what if they mummified me? And I thought it would just be so poignant and horrible. And then
you can tell them to do that.
Yeah, you can. You can be very specific in what if you donate your body to oh yeah, Fetchbug. Fetchbug is our mortuary student who also streams. She definitely, I'm totally sure she talks about the body farm sometimes.
Yeah, so the body farm in Tennessee was the first one, and now the U.S. has 1, 2, 3, 4 total, I think.
I think so.
There's one in Texas, one in Illinois, one in Florida.
I thought there was one in Massachusetts or somewhere, or New York.
So,
maybe?
So Boston University has a sort of body farm-esque thing. It's more like a forensic anthropology research center.
Yeah, I don't
they
know why
sort of do it.
I might be thinking of the Illinois. Ashley's thinking.
Yeah, the one in Illinois.
Pennsylvania. I don't know. I can't remember.
There could be one. I
just thought there was at least one, because the thing I thought was interesting with the body farm is that most of these are placed outside, and I think it's important to have body farms that are all over the U.S. because the U.S. has, or meaning not just all over the U.S., but like in different complete environments, because obviously the first one started in Tennessee. Tennessee can get very humid in the summer. I think it's important to have one in a place where it snows, because if you miss the body farm is a way that that bioarchaeologists and forensic anthropologists can. Oh, thank you for the follow, Plucky Prairie Punch. Welcome to the lecture. But the body farm is somewhere where we can research how a body decays and how different factors affect it, so that, especially in a forensic version, so that if, say, a body is found and they need to make sure, I'm sorry, Haley, I know it was, if they want to convict somebody and find out how they were murdered, when they were murdered, it's important to have these standards to learn how the body decays over time in different climates. Yeah,
so the one in Tennessee is very temperate, really, I guess, because it can be cold, it can be hot. But then if you go down to Florida, it's at the University of South Florida. That's where they have that body farm. It's in Tampa. That one is going to be more of a humid environment, wetter because it does rain a lot. I used to live in Florida. And they're able to see if the climate there changes how an individual decomposes compared to if it's snowy, because there is one actually I forgot about. It's up in Alaska, but they don't actually do humans. They do pigs, because pig remains are similar to human. Well, they're sort of similar to humans. So yeah, body farm, it's fun to talk about. If you want to find a video, you can find it on YouTube. I refuse to watch it again because it has maggots and I don't like maggots.
Last question about the body farm from Ashley is, do bioarchaeologists use them for research? Because she knows that like the mortuary industry and like forensic anthropologists use it. So do bioarchaeologists also use it?
So we do not, because we don't have flesh.
That's what I thought.
So I guess this is something I should have started out with also. So what defines archaeology and what defines forensics. So in an American standpoint, 50 years is approximately when we start saying that something is archaeological, which I might not agree with completely. But that's the common denominators around 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to Europe, it might be more than that. It's probably 100 years or more.
Mm-hmm.
But that's to help differentiate between a forensic case and an archaeological case. But always, whenever you are doing an excavation, which I will talk about a little bit later, even though it's not on my slides, but it's a question that I can't remember who. I think it was Stardust had.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you find human remains at an excavation, you have to stop completely, immediately.
Mm-hmm.
There's no more digging that can happen until a coroner comes out to decide if it's recent or not. And then you can continue.
Because essentially it's the belief if it's 50 years, if someone died within 50 years, they have the belief that maybe whoever killed them, if it was homicide, that they could convict them. Is that kind of the basic belief that it's like, okay,
yeah.
maybe that person might still be alive, but who knows? And so that's kind of where the line of forensic and bioarchaeology is.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, yeah, if you want to click off whenever I answer a question, go ahead and do it.
Okay.
Yeah, actually just ask in Discord.
It's totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah, Kate, you said exactly what I just said. So absolutely, you're 100% correct.
Yeah. Okay, so and then the other aspect that we use is the pelvis. The pelvis has multiple areas that you can look at, but the one that I prefer looking at the most is the greater sciatic notch, which is pretty much almost right where you're sitting. So the wider the archway, the more likely it is to be female, more narrow, more likely it is to be male. This is also very easy because I was taught in undergrad that if you put your thumb there, if you can wiggle it, it's most likely a female. If you can't wiggle it, it's a male.
Mm-hmm. It's for giving birth to babies.
Yeah, that's literally, so there's a study that was done years ago that looked at a portion of the pelvis to help determine how many kids someone had. That has not been supported completely by most researchers.
Mm-hmm.
But that specific margin does help a little bit because it can tell you if it's a male or a female.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just not showing that.
Isn't there also something that you can tell if a woman has had any children, because there's literally like a piece that like could get chipped off the pelvis, like, oh.
So whenever you, okay, I'm not sure if this is 100% accurate.
Yeah.
So I've had to do some activities whenever I was teaching the Intro to Bioarchaeology class in my undergrad with our professor, because what we had is a peer-led training thing where undergrads who had already passed the class with an A could be a TA, an undergraduate TA,
cool,
for the class. So I had teaching experience with that. And we actually so we had infant skulls, like not real infant skulls, they were plastic. And then we had pelvises. And we would actually put the heads through to see how the head and the baby would come out of the pelvis.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm not 100% positive this is accurate, but sometimes they'll actually break the pelvis partially if the head is too big.
I remember, I don't remember what it was, but I do remember from my forensic anthropology class that there is a portion of the skull or of the pelvis that it has these like very slight notches, and I think it's more from like the muscles like pulling at it. And if there are these things, that there is a higher possibility that this woman gave birth, and like that was very shocking to me. But I hate looking at this because all I can think about is when I broke my tailbone and my tailbone was going the opposite way than this little curve.
If Haley actually want to remind us later, whenever we finish part 2, to bring up a picture and I can show you exactly which part you're talking about.
Okay.
I can send you a picture and then you can pull it up on the screen later.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we can do that after this part.
Okay. Next slide, please.
Done.
Okay, so the pelvis, we're going back to this. So if you look at the top one, that is going to be a male, both the left and the right picture. The bottom one is going to be a female. So the sacrum, which is your tailbone, is, if it's sitting more inwards, it can't be a female because that's where the baby has to come out from. So we can, if we have the full pelvis, we can use the sacrum and both sides of the pelvises, because it comes apart, to determine or estimate if it's a male. And if it's farther back, it's a female. There's just another picture. Okay, next.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're moving on to age estimation, because that was a long time on sex estimation. Wow. So
you said it's your
with
favorite.
age
You might as well talk about your favorite.
Oh, I do love it. I can talk about it forever. So age estimation is harder because this one is highly dependent on an individual's sex, diet, DNA, environment, stress markers that might have occurred during their life. So if they were malnourished throughout their life, if they had there was actually a talk that I missed because I was at work on Thursday night by Sharon DeWitt, who's at the University of South Carolina, who focuses on the Black Death, and she looks at paleodemography, so statures, age, sex, all that, and who was more likely to die during the Black Death, and who survived the Black Death, and how survival impacted their height and stuff like that. So how diseases and major epidemics and pandemics like we are going through right now might affect someone's livelihood and later in life. So whenever we're using age estimations, we have multiple categories aging from infants all the way up to older adults, which is 45 plus. Next slide.
Done.
Okay, so the most common way to determine or estimate age is with dental eruption. This is only usable up until your third molars, which your wisdom teeth, are fully erupted. Once that happens, then it does get considerably harder to estimate someone's age. So this graph, I guess, is actually showing the different eruption time periods based off of someone's age, and that's going from the deciduous, so your baby teeth, all the way up through your permanent teeth. And this is the one that I personally use whenever I'm doing any type of skeletal analysis. Let's see. Yep. Next.
Done.
Okay, so the next method that we use for age estimation is bone fusion. This one, like I said, you can still use it. It's also highly dependent on all those factors before: age, sex, race, should say, diet, DNA, all of that. So the last bone that actually ends up fusing is your clavicle, which is your collarbone. That one fuses between around 24 to 27 years of age. Some go up to 30. This graph on the right hand side shows it going up to 32, which is a possibility, but I've never experienced that before. Typically it's around 27 as the high end. But whenever you are growing, as I've said, you have different portions of your bone fused together. So every 300 bones going down to 206. You have the diaphysis, which is the main portion of your bone, and then you have the epiphysis on both ends. Those fuse throughout age and help. That's like your growth plate, is what we call them in lay terms. So whenever you're growing and you are hurting when you're growing, that's what's happening, is that there's a fusing.
I knew this was going to happen. Paleontologizing is here. I knew this was going to happen. And I turned off the emote wall. I'm turning it on just for now. Welcome, welcome. I knew everyone was going to be here. Okay. I knew this was going to happen. I'm going to the just chatting just for a sec so we can Welcome, welcome everybody. How is everybody doing? Paleontologizing, how are you doing? My silly alert is behind everything. There we go. No, not at all paleontologizing. We would love for people to come and join our lecture. And I'm gonna have to thank all these people. Thank you all so much. Oh my goodness. So welcome, welcome. My name is Melissa. I am in denial in more ways than one. I'm an Egyptologist and an archaeologist, and we're streaming a lecture tonight. It is our lovely first guest lecture, and we are joined by my lovely friend Mark. He is a bioarchaeologist from the University of York, and he has given us a lecture on the beginnings of bioarchaeology. Executive Storm, thank you so much for subscribing for 10 months. All right, I need to quickly. Thank you, General Steve. Thank you, Baska. Thank you, Chayboy. Thank you, Sintrosi. Thank you, Blaith. Thank you, Zeal Zaddy. Thank you, Milky Scythe. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Kyler Ray Traveler. Thank you, Rough Maddie Art. Thank you, Nader Fiend. And thank you for the guiding my posture. I am not sitting up straight. It's just the Indiana Jones theme song, just constantly. But welcome, welcome in everybody. We're taking a quick pause to welcome in our raid. There's the King Tut. So we are talking about, we're here for the archaeology, not the thank yous. Oh, well, we'll get back into the lecture if that's what you want, of course. A fellow archaeologist, oh my goodness, even more. Bring it in. We love our fellow archaeologists. We have so many lovely archaeologists. Hi, Charlie's Dragon. Hello. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nighttime Blues, and thank you, RHP Go the Bean. I can't say that. The Bean. Thank you so much. I'm so glad. Oh yes, Maddie Holmes, you're an archaeologist too. Thank you so much. I'm so glad everybody's here. When all of these alerts stop, when we'll get back into the lecture. But we're doing a lecture on bioarchaeology. Mark has been presenting us all the basics of bioarchaeology, and we're going through sex estimation, age estimation is where we are on currently. And then he's going to continue his lecture, and we're actually going to do an activity where we're going to let you guys do some sex and age estimation on some images. There is a trigger warning if you are not comfortable with looking at or hearing the talk of bones, human remains, mummified remains, anything like that. We will be talking about it constantly tonight. And then after we do the activity, we'll answer some questions, and then I will be giving a presentation on the recent CT scan analysis of the pharaoh Amenhotep I mummy.
God means a forensic anthropologist, so this is going to be very scary. If I say something wrong, we're going to say something.
Who's it? Oh! The Bean is a forensic anthropologist. Ah, oh, we love forensic anthropologists here. Maddie Holmes has the forensic MA. Oh my gosh, this is going to be super awkward if we couldn't handle death conversations. We were both just talking about how we both have super strong stomachs, but we can't handle, what was it? Anything to do with, like, anything to do with the stomach and, like,
we're talking about the body farming. We can't do
maggots. Yeah, we can't handle maggots. I don't think I can. I can handle the body farm. I cannot handle the maddox in there. I will say, if you would like to ask any questions, the easiest way to do that is to redeem the 1 Onk channel point, which is lecture questions, and then that will go into our feed, so we'll be able to see it if we miss it. I think we're almost done. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Anaha, and thank you so much, Scrants Fubert. Texas Cribbit lives in the town. I live in a town with a body farm. That's amazing.
So I'm
Very
guessing
cool.
that's going to be where Texas State is.
I'm based off of the username. I would say I would agree with you on that one. There aren't many
So,
of you around in my field. Oh, well, thank you, General Steve. I'm so glad. All right, I'm backing up.
You actually asked the question, does genetics fall under bioarchaeology? Technically, it does. If you were at the beginning of it, I actually did mention that we use ancient DNA for under bioarchaeology.
Awesome. I'm so glad. All right. Sorry, I was just reading through to see. I love that. We are uniting. Me and our other friend, amateur archaeologist, she's also an archaeologist. We're creating our own little group of archaeologists on stream where we play some games, but also do some fun lectures. And please, if you are interested in like learning more about everything, yeah, sorry, Maddie. I had to bump Mark's mic down because the alerts were so loud, and I don't know how to balance anything, y'all. I'm not a streamer. I'm an Egyptologist. We bumped it up. But if anybody is interested, I'm just gonna plug my socials here because I'm gonna be making a TikTok for. I'm going to be making TikTok and putting it out everywhere. If anybody is Egyptologist, archaeologist, and you have done any sort of research, I would love to help y'all if you want to kind of practice presenting to a group of people that are really interested. This is our first guest lecture. I want to do a guest lecture at least once a month. And I already have a couple people, and I want to ask some of my friends who like don't know anything about Twitch, and I'll have to teach them about Twitch and everything. But I'm always looking to help people share and help people get comfortable with like a more informal way to present and stuff. And so I want to try to do these as often as possible, and I want to get a large range of stuff. But I am an Egyptologist, but I am also I got my undergraduate in just plain old archaeology. I like pretty much all parts of history and art history especially, and so I'm kind of willing to use my platform for a way for people to both practice and get their research out, because sometimes after you publish a paper it never sees the light of day ever again. And that is why I'm hoping, cross your fingers y'all, that I kick into gear. In 2 weeks I hope to present my master's thesis in a presentation for y'all, because I've been waiting to do that forever. And I'm hoping to do that soon.
I'll do it eventually.
Eventually. But yes, I want to know about people's research. I just am always so interested about what interests other people, truly.
No, sir, we do not do paleontology.
No. Yeah, but that's a good question. That like it seems like it could be a part of archaeology, but technically archaeology is part of anthropology. And like literally the anth part is human. And so while they are very similar, and here's hoping, because I keep plugging this, I'm hoping we can do a lecture with paleontologizing, literally just talking about the differences and also the similarities, because I know that there's going to be an insane amount of similarities. But I want to do a lecture on that because we obviously get mistaken for each other all the time. And you would think that our careers or the fields would combine together, but they really don't, which is very funny how it kind of happens like that.
Well, as Maddie just mentioned, I mean, Danny did paleoanthropology earlier, so that's where people might get a little confused, is the paleo aspect. So paleoanthropology is the study of human remains from before history, so thousands and thousands and thousands of years old.
Which is so interesting because it's paleoanthropology, so I guess it's still in anthropology.
Yeah. And
still technically in archaeology, but it's like real early.
Yeah, so that would be anything from evolution. So how our brains evolved, how
Australopithecus. Yeah. I remember taking these classes.
Yeah. Lucy.
I don't know where Lucy actually is, but they have a replica of her in the New York Natural History Museum. I don't actually know I don't think her real remains are actually on display though.
They also have, whenever I was doing my internship at the American Museum of Natural History, They have a replica, like
Wait, is
facial
that the one
reconstruction
in New
of.
York?
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry, that's the one I meant. I always forget that
yeah,
that one's the American Natural History Museum. But
yeah.
yeah, that's where I saw it. Yeah.
So they have also a like reconstructed face of, I think it was the Turkana boy,
Oh yeah, Turkana boy. I
which is
remember
actually
him.
really cool because I met can't remember his name. I met one of the scholars who actually was the first person who ever looked at his remains.
Oh, thank you
Oh,
so
it is
much.
Thurman's Day tomorrow.
Thank you so much, General Stee, for coming in with the raid. I actually think it's also women in. What did I say? I saw Women in Archaeology Day or something. I don't know what it was, but
Women
I was
in
like,
science.
Women in Science. That's what it is. It's Women in Science Day today. Happy Women in Science Day. All right. Let me know when you're ready, and we will get back to the lecture.
Also, Maddie, paleomyth could also be under archaeology too, depending on what you're looking at.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Let's get back to here. All right. So again, trigger warning for human remains, animal remains, and talk about it. But continue on with. If you're done with age estimation, bone fusion, I can go to the next one. But if you
Yeah, go into the next one because we've already finished it.
Okay. Teeth.
Okay, so we're back to teeth. So this is one that I personally hate doing because it's highly dependent. So to do older individuals, we can look at tooth wear. So this involves looking at how each section of the tooth is broken down through time, which occurs because of diet. But if you look far enough back, for instance, with the ancient Egyptians, they would have eaten a lot of diet that had sand, for instance. So that would have destroyed parts of the teeth differently back then than it does today. Today, we also have very good dental care that can limit how much tooth wear you have. So tooth wear, it's very fluctuating. Some people still use it, some people don't. If you talk to some forensic anthropologists, they still use it because they have to, because this is one of the few ways that you can get older individual ages. But yeah, and then if you look at the picture, again, trigger warning with the picture, you can actually see the different dental wear. So if you want, Melissa, show them like the light yellow on the one of the molars, and then the light one, that's where we see the dental wear.
I hate to say it.
Mm.
This is what my teeth look like.
Same.
Or that what they will look. I've always joked that if I ever are murdered, if I'm ever murdered, someone would be able to identify me so quickly, either my dentist or all of my doctors, because of all the weird broken bones I have. They would be.
I don't have any broken bones.
I've broken my rib. Well, the funny thing is that I have almost an entire X-ray of my entire body. I think the only portion I'm missing is like my pelvis and my femurs. I've definitely gotten both my ankles X-rayed. I've gotten my foot X-rayed several times because I've broken my toe several times. Oh wait, lies. I broke my tailbone. I do have my pelvis X-rayed. I think I just don't have like my middle spine. I did get my chest X-rayed when I thought I broke a rib. And I've broken one wrist, and I've broken a couple pinkies and fingers. And I got my head x-rayed when I thought I broke my nose. So I literally have almost my entire body, of course, over the course of a lot of years. But yes, I have a lot of weird, not even huge, horrible injuries, just me thinking I have a lot of injuries.
Okay. Next, also don't forget if anyone, if you're asking any questions, redeem one channel point so then we see it show up because it will light up whenever you ask the question. Please. Okay. Now we are on. Did you change the slide?
Yes, I did.
Okay, it's on stature estimation.
Yes, stature estimation.
Okay. Again, it's still showing age. There you go.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so. People who get me late, I'm 18 seconds lagged behind Melissa. Probably more than that right now. Who knows?
It's probably more, but Be patient. This is we're testing out
Yeah.
new technology and figuring out how to do guest lectures.
I'm the guinea pig.
I mean, but you're a cute guinea pig.
Okay. Hey, so, with saturation, like I said at the beginning of the lecture, this is something that you're actually not going to do for the activity because it's impossible. You have to have the bone with you. So I'm just going to teach about it slightly. So with saturation estimation, it's a little bit of a sticky subject with bioarchaeologists and forensic anthropologists because the methods that we use, the equations that we use are from really old, first off, at least the ones that are commonly used. If you go to the standards book, which is in the resources, under the interesting readings, I think is what it's called, I can't remember. They still use the equations in here. So Trotter and Glesser, back in 1952, they were using war dead from the Korean War to come to estimations for stature and come to figure out how we can calculate stature if we only have part of the body. So they used whites and blacks from the Korean War, which is very sticky already because that's just assuming that all races will be the same, or races will be the same. And it's also looking at a specific subset of individuals, such as soldiers, who are typically going to be the most fit because they have to be in the military. And that's excluding everyone else who might have some type of illness or something like that wrong with them. So with stature estimation, with Trotter and Glesser, you have to have the race estimation, which I'll talk about, I think, on the next slide. And then you have a fairly large standard of error. Like for the white male, it's plus or minus 3.27. That's going to be not as narrow as we'd hope. So today what we have is Albanese et al. Back in 2017, they created a equation that doesn't require race, thankfully. Mm-hmm. So a lot of us are now finally starting to use these, but that one has an even wider error margin because we don't estimate race anymore, or mostly we don't estimate race anymore.
Yep.
I thought I saw something on the chat. Did I not?
I mean, I was chatting, but
okay. I thought I saw someone type my name. Maybe I didn't. Oh, I did.
I'm scrolling back.
Oh, Cade. They were telling me to close this feed and open it again. I tried that earlier. It didn't work, sadly.
Oh no.
Yeah. Okay. Next slide, please.
All right.
Okay. Lastly, we have race. Technically, if you go back far enough, this was part of the biological profile that we would use. So this is why I have the race with the let's not talk about it symbol. So, like I said earlier, one of our founding fathers of American anthropology was Franz Boas. One of his research projects, he was what we call a Thorfield anthropologist. So he used cultural, biological, archaeology, and linguistics in his research. And he's actually the reason we have so many anthropologists today who can trace back to him. So if anyone's heard of like Ruth Benedict, Margaret Mead, what other big name ones are there? Kroeber, any of those, they've been trained by Boas. So whenever we were first looking at race back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, we were using the skull and we were putting people into classifications based off of the shape of their skull. He would use calipers to measure distances between the front and the back, the sides, the top and bottom, everything, to see the eye orbit openings, the nose openings, everything, to see if there was a difference between each of the races. There are some similarities that we see, but overall, this is not a very dependable method to use anymore, and this is why we don't use race at all. Sadly, our early foundings of anthropology also has a big issue with eugenics. Mm-hmm. We're the reason that eugenics started, to be honest. The Nazis looked at our research and decided, oh, there definitely is differences between the races. There are differences between why white people are superior, etc. So they decided to use our research to help their movement and help their
not good.
I'll just say it idiocy.
Yep. Yep.
So today we try not to do race estimations because of how sticky the subject is, and because if you look at it from especially a forensic perspective, races are very socially constructed.
Yep.
If you look at one person who might be mixed, they could be a mix of black and white. They might show up as white, but they might identify as black. This is what happens with globalization and people intermingling and everyone having fun together. Is we will have mixed races, and whenever we start trying to estimate race, it's going to be impossible. So we don't do it anymore. There's no reason to. It's not important for what most of us are doing. Bioarchaeologically, it helps a little bit because there was a research that was done here at the University of York where they were doing the Roman city, which York, if no one knows, started out as a Roman city and then it became a Viking city. And we actually have one individual that I know of for sure who was black. And they could tell that because of her skeleton, and they did DNA and isotopes. So the DNA could tell where the person was from, and the isotopes can also tell where the person was from. So bioarchaeologically, some people still use it to help make like those types of discoveries. But most forensic anthropologists today, like Don Owsley at the Smithsonian, he has openly said that he only does it because he has to.
Yeah.
He has to check a box and that's it. Other than that, he doesn't believe in it.
And again, that is because forensically, if you are, and especially in the case of if it's a Jane or John Doe, you don't know anything about them, you haven't discovered their identity. When you need to describe to people this missing person or something, you need what is the most outfronting, obvious feature of them, but that does not necessarily mean identity. I feel like there should be a way that we could talk about the same way that we talk about sex and gender in one that is this biological thing, and this, like, there should be, I mean, technically it is race and then identity, because that's just how you identify, but a lot of people don't use it as interchangeably as, and I mean, still, people are still improving on getting better at using the difference between sex and gender. But I feel like, yeah, Ash, that's a good point. Ethnic background. Yeah, that's even, and that it's all this wishy-washy thing of how people identify, and that's why I never get into it a lot, because I don't have a lot of knowledge about it. But when a lot of people bring up what is the ethnicity of the ancient Egyptians, I answer, they're Egyptian. They're Egyptian, because the concept of being Africa did not exist. It was just a large place. There was no concept of Africa. There was no concept of, there wasn't even, honestly, the conception of being black. That was not a thing back then. The ancient Egypt, and I hate to say this, the ancient Egyptians are one of the most pretentious people in the ancient world. They thought they were, and a lot of people thought this, that like, a lot of ancient civilizations thought they were the center of the world. And the ancient Egyptians thought not just that they are the center of the world, but that they are order and everything else around them is chaos. And like, to say that they believed that they were this way, that is so arbitrary. They were Egyptians. Like, they thought that they were better than everybody else because they were Egyptians. And so it's a touchy subject that I never really want to bring up, because I just don't know how to say it as candidly as these and this is the same thing if you guys were here when I was talking about the supposed first homosexual couple in ancient Egypt. We don't know if that's how they identified, because back then we don't know how people identified. We don't have all these writings down. of saying, yes, we believed this and this and that. We don't know. And so we can't take our modern conceptions and put them on ancient people. It just doesn't work that way.
And you're also talking about like ethnicity.
Mm-hmm.
So the issue with ethnicity though is that, so my mother was a foster mother throughout my entire life. And I had one of her really good friends that we went to church with. She adopted two kids, a brother and a sister from Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So technically their ethnicity is Russian.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at it, technically that the definition of ethnicity is a group of people who believe and act the same way, have the same culture.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever they moved, they would have had the American lifestyle, American culture, so they might have changed their ethnicity at that point. So ethnicity is another thing that we just don't look at, really.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about their culture and stuff like that through archaeology and through cultural anthropology and through biocultural anthropology in general. But we try not to use, again, differences in bone or differences in grave goods and stuff like that to say that this person was this race or this ethnicity anymore, because it's just such an arbitrary concept.
Yeah. And it's just such a hotly debated thing, and it's hard when you're looking at a lot of their opinions will differ from people who study ancient studies to people who study modern studies. And I think a lot of people think that it's universal in like all anthropologists should like, and I'm like, but it can't be, because you have to look at what you have to try to put yourself in their shoes to understand how they would see the world around them. Because it's what is it called? It's ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism. It's like my one thing that I took out of anthropology theory and like actually really like learned. Anthropology theory was very hard for me because theory is in general very hard for me. But as ethnocentrism is putting your concept of what is normal onto somebody else. And so it's like if you went to a place and all of the women walked around shirtless, you could think, oh my god, that's so vulgar, blah blah blah, that's so horrible. And they'll look at you and they're like, oh my god, why is she wearing a shirt? That's so vulgar, she's not appreciative of her body. And like, we cannot put our concepts, how we believe, onto another group of people. And that is the same exact thing with ancient people. You cannot do that because we don't know. Like, luckily, when it comes to these modern cultures that are still alive and thriving, we can talk to them and we can learn more. But like ancient cultures, we can't do that. We cannot make these crazy assumptions that I think a lot of people make.
Yeah. Exactly. So race, none.
One quick question. Does the fact that almost all humans today are hybridized hominids, Neanderthal, Denisovan, ghost, I don't know, that's in parentheses, based on DNA, does that add anything to the quote-unquote race discussion?
I'm not sure because I'm not a paleoanthropologist, so those would fall under paleoanthropology in general. But in my opinion, they should not, because so Neanderthals would have happened thousands of years ago before a lot of intermingling, I guess, would have happened to where we would have the idea of even what race was. Because race didn't even come about, like the idea of race wasn't even a thing in people's minds until the Age of Exploration back in 1492. So, in my opinion, I don't think they would have had much of an effect on it. But again, I'm a bioarchaeologist, not a paleoanthropologist.
Yeah.
I can't say for
No, it's the thing that I thought of before and I completely forgot was the other thing that I saw recently, how Europeans were noticing, like, so for all of my Americans in the chat, I'm sure at one point in your life somebody has asked you like where your family is from, and you give out the series of percentages. I've done this very many times, and something that I've noticed and I've read about is that Europeans don't do this. And obviously that is because in the majority area of America is known as this melting pot. We are known as a place where people from other countries can come and visit, and then over time, we have now become this mixing pot. And not that Europe isn't. Europe is definitely also a mixing pot. When the countries are so close together, like, I'm sure that there's a ton of mixing. But the concept of how you identify is very different in different countries, and I'm sure in different regions of the United States. Talking about how you identify and heading up. And it's something that's very interesting is that, like, I am, when you technically look at it, I am half Irish and mostly half Hungarian and German. And although some people would identify with Irish, like, I know Ashley and I have had this conversation because Ashley loves, Ashley, my mod, loves St. Patrick's Day. I've never been a fan of it. I've never been like, okay, whatever, even though I am Irish. But I am extremely tied in with my Hungarian heritage, and that is truly only because my grandparents immigrated here. My dad is technically a first-generation American in that sense. But the Irish on my other side, we've been here for a really long time. We've been here for at least 4 or 5 generations. And so I would never identify myself as an Irish American, even though I technically am. It's just not how I would. And it's even hard for me to say that if I would consider myself Hungarian American, because I'm not. I am a Hungarian grandchild. Like, I'm a passed down enough. And because the other thing is, I also found this girl on TikTok who makes Hungarian recipes, and she speaks Hungarian, and I'm like, oh, I can't do that. Like, oh, like, I feel like I'm a fake Hungarian when I watch her videos, and I'm like, wow, I don't know how to speak Hungarian. I don't know how to make all this delicious food. I feel fake. Which is just like, it's how identity works. Identity is just different for every single person.
I mean, that's like me. So my great-grandparents immigrated from Portugal to Hawaii before Hawaii was even a state, because that didn't happen until 50s, I think, was it?
Very, very recently in comparison to the history of America.
So in theory, technically, my father is a first generation also because of that entire thing. Mm-hmm. Like, they immigrated here, but the state wasn't even a state.
Yeah.
It was still a kingdom of Hawaii at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But
which is so cool. And so sad.
Yeah. There's still a lot of people who want it back as a kingdom. So I'm 25% Portuguese, but I claim that side more than anything else because that's what I am mostly. Everything else is like a mixture of things. British, Scottish, Irish, German. But that's what I identify as, even though my parents divorced when I was very young. Mm-hmm. So it really just depends on who you talk to and what they want to do. As everyone's said before, is that, let's be honest, America, with it being so young, and we don't have our own independent culture. Mm-hmm. We want to adapt other people's cultures to our own. Hence why if you go to the South, where I lived for 4 years, it's mostly like Cajun or French or Spanish cultures. So yeah, okay.
Kate says, "What's wrong with being yourself? Nothing's wrong. It's just
exactly."
And the last thing is that when I did research on Egyptomania, I actually discovered a very interesting article about how I'm trying to think of when this was in America. I think this was post-Revolutionary War, possibly pre-Civil War. There was this kind of scrambling to find what American culture was. And so there were kind of these series of, like, strangely, they're campaigns almost. There were these kind of pushes through different types of culture. So through architecture, through commercialism, where they were trying to create a American culture. And through architecture, they actually did this by using Greek and Roman architecture and ancient Egyptian architecture as well. And so if you ever go to DC, guess what? Everything's got columns. And so the concept was to bring apart all of the very good parts, and this is good as in very big quotation marks here, the good parts of our ancestry. So they essentially pointed out mostly the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, and as a lower third place, the ancient Egyptians as well. And so they were kind of pulling from these we are the descendant of these Greeks and Romans and the higher prowess of knowledge, and so we are going to kind of emote and like show that that's how we are, and that's where all of this kind of building of, like, I mean, they were literally trying to build up a culture when culture is like getting a nickname. You can't build it yourself, really. Like, it just kind of happens based off of your circumstances.
Yeah.
Great conversation, everyone. Let's get back to dental diseases.
So, teeth are actually my favorite thing to do.
I love teeth.
Because they survive. They survive through almost anything. So there are 3 that I'm going to touch on the most, and then the rest of them, maybe eventually, if I want to do it, we can do the full pathology lecture. Who knows? So on the first picture on the left, we have what's called linear enamel hyperplasia, or LEH for short. I'm just going to say LEH because it's easier. So these are non-specific stress markers that occur during dental development, and they are just defects on the enamel that occur due to either stress or malnutrition or pandemics, being ill, huge range of things. So if you're not seeing the common trend right now, everything is tightly dependent on everything else.
Yep.
So there was a study that was done a few years back, I think it was like 2013 or so, on individuals at Pompeii and Herculaneum, and they were able to trace LEH, because you can actually trace it by where the LEH happens on the tooth, to an approximate age range, and they could tell when. So Pompeii erupted in 79, and then 15 years before that, we had the earthquake that was believed to be an onset of the eventual eruption of Vesuvius. They were able to trace the earthquake based off of the LEH, which is kind of cool. And then the middle picture, we have 2 different ones. We have dental, well, 3 if you look at the picture, but I'm only going to talk about 2. Dental caries, which are just cavities. So that's just caused by an increase, which everyone I'm sure has had at least one.
I've had so
it's
many.
Just an increase, same.
I literally, this is the only thing that gets me through the cavities, is all I think about in my head is, I don't understand how human teeth can be like the one bone that'll survive out of a whole skull, and yet I have so many cavities. And I just repeat that over and over again and just try to convince myself that my teeth will last longer than me, especially with all the junk that they're putting in my teeth to fix them.
Yep. So caries or cavities are caused by an intake or an uptake of sugar consumption and poor dental hygiene. If you don't take care of those caries, they can actually become an abscess, which you'll see right below the molar there. It's where the bone is being destroyed, and that's supposed to help let the fluid or pus come out, because if it doesn't, then you can actually die, because it would become septic, and it would get into your bloodstream, up to your brain, or wherever else in the body, and could eventually kill you. So if you have cavities and they're really bad, you might want to get those fixed. And then finally, we have on the right-hand side, dental calculus. So dental calculus, like I was saying earlier when I was talking about paleoproteomics, can be used to tell us a lot. So if you look at most ancient teeth, most of them will have some dental calculus. This is just a moderate, actually. I had a picture that wasn't going to appear that pretty much covered the entire tooth. And I did not want to show that because I found it really disgusting. So what a lot of bioarchaeologists will do is they will take the calculus off and then run it through a mass spectrometer, tell about what someone was eating, where they were from, whenever that accumulated. There's a research project here in the UK, I believe at Bradford, if I'm not mistaken, that's looking at tobacco intake. And they're being able to do that based off of dental calculus. So, yeah, teeth, fun. Diseases on teeth, fun. But you should probably clean your teeth.
Clean your teeth. Clean your teeth from an adult who has too many cavities and still getting them. Clean your teeth, everyone.
Exactly.
And if it helps, I'm so sorry. Charlie just said that he had an abscess on his teeth, and I'm so sorry because that
Mm-hmm.
probably is awful. But interesting thing. Oh, I'm a silly girl says floss, and you should floss, even though I am bad at it. You should
I hate
floss.
it though.
I hate flossing.
I
But
think I feel like it hurts more.
it does. It does absolutely. Um, but an interesting fun fact is ancient Egyptians had horrible teeth, and I think most people know this. But some of the times when we look at mummies, the only thing that we can tell, like, what is wrong with them, like if we're trying to look for like a cause of death, the only thing that we can see is that they have abscesses in their jaw. And an abscess could definitely lead to an infection, which then could lead to sepsis, which then could lead to death. But like, it's kind of silly if you really truly looked at all of these, like, quote unquote death certificates of these mummies, that they're all like they died from dental abscesses, because they probably didn't. But when you don't have any soft tissue to like do full like autopsies with, and now we don't do full autopsies with, sometimes all we can say is, yeah, he had really bad teeth.
Yeah. So Ash left. I don't know if you're still here, but bye. Good night, Ash.
Yay. Bye, Ash. Yes, I'm probably gonna, the VOD will be up for anybody who is tired and wants to go to bed. That's totally understandable. The VOD will be up, and then hopefully if I get onto it, I will upload this to my YouTube page. I might do a little editing. But then we'll have this up there with all the other lectures. All right. Next slide.
Okay, next slide. So whenever going back into paleopathology, which is the study of ancient diseases, there are two that I want to talk about also. Orbitallia and
Sorry, that's so loud. I'm so sorry.
I don't get those notifications.
I know. I need to figure out the audio. No, I'm a silly girl. I would much rather you follow than break everybody's eardrums. But it's fine. Thank you for the follow.
We have Orbitallia, Don't Die, Haley, and product of resources. So, shortened, I'm just going to say CO and pH. So, CO is, if you look into the orbits of these pictures, they're just little pores that occur in the eyes. And for the pH, it's going to be on the top of the cranium, so the top of the head. You can get them on really any portion of the cranium. They also are not 100% sure where it comes from and why we get it. There was a study in a paper written back in 2007, I think, by Phil Walker, who thinks that it could be iron deficiency, so anemia. So what's happening is the red blood cells are enlarging, which is causing an enlargement of the marrow, and that's where these pores come from. There's still a lot of research that has to be done, but again, a non-specific stress marker that only occurs during development, because you can't use later in life because you're done growing for those. Okay, next slide.
Oh, so this is a very good view of cranial sutures.
Yes, which I didn't talk about because I
love cranial sutures.
I'll talk about it here in a minute after I do the next slide. So,
trauma.
What side are you on?
I'm on trauma.
Okay, so trauma. There's many different traumas, but these are the two I want to talk about. So on the left-hand side, we have what is considered blunt force trauma. So that is literally just an object that was used to attack someone, or if you fell and you hit your head, it causes a blunt force trauma, and it's just typically non-penetrating, but can be penetrating also. And on the right-hand side, we have what is considered sharp force trauma, which will, as it denotes, since it's sharp, it will go through the bone typically. And if you look at it, the right one, it looks like that is actually healing or has been healed. So this individual lived past when he was attacked. Which,
so freaking cool.
Yeah, like if you...
That's so cool.
Yeah, if I can zoom in on a picture.
Is it like the wider circle is kind of healed?
Yeah, so if you look at the margins of the wound, whenever it starts to close off and it starts to become more rounded, that's going to be one sign that it's been healing. So if you, I can't zoom in very far in this, but it looks like it's completely healed and that there's no more healing process happening. So
that's amazing.
Unless, I can't remember who it was that a forensic anthropologist wants to say if I'm wrong or not, because I'm not a forensic anthropologist.
There is like a tiny hole, which makes me worried.
Yeah.
But
so
it does, the outside like margin of the circle looks healed, but there's definitely, this bone has like slipped underneath. But it also looks like it's kind of healed, which it can be. Like, even if your bones are not exactly aligned, like that's when I broke my wrist, my bones went like this. And so I was, oh God, I was like 12 or something. The doctor just grabbed my arm and just pretty much forced the bones to touch. Because technically they could have fused like this, but that's what, in the past, if you ever see like these huge trauma, you'll see these just like jagged, like, oh, it's like just these giant like bones that are all like kind of weirdly moldable because they've healed wrong, essentially.
Yeah.
And yes, this is a bad headache for sure.
So what holes are you talking about? Are you talking about the ones that's right above the eyes?
No, there's in this picture on the left, there's like one tiny little hole, which makes me think that this was more of a sharp force trauma than a blunt force. I'm circling it with my mouse. But
I won't be able to see it though.
Yeah, it's very small, just in the center, but it definitely does not look like it's closed up, and that's why I'm worried that this person may not have had a nice life when they were still living after the injury.
Yeah, I'm going to assume that that person did not live.
No, I'm going to assume so.
Oh, God, what the hell? I can't zoom out on the computer now. There you go.
With a candlestick in the pyramid. Thank you, I'm a silly girl. Entirely
since
possible.
You brought this Since you brought this up, I'm actually going to talk about it now.
Yeah.
Because I didn't put it as an activity. So, since this isn't part of the activity, I'm not going to let y'all cheat. So, you can actually have more than one form of trauma. You can have a blunt force and you can have a sharp force trauma at the same time. It depends on what the weapon was. If it had a hilt, you might see some blunt force trauma and sharp force trauma. So if you look at the picture on the right, I'm pretty sure that looks like it's going to be a sword, probably a broadsword, with how long it is and how wide it is. That one could also have some blunt force trauma in it. So, yeah, there's that. It's kind of fun. Okay, so that's ending the trauma. Now, do we want to do questions first and then activity, or activity then questions?
Let's do the activity first.
Okay.
And then
so if everyone wants to click the resources, I just tagged it.
I think you spelled it wrong. You spelled it wrong. I got it.
There you go.
So go to the second link that is in that and check out the resources page, and we're going to do a little activity. And this is based off of what we've learned in this one. And then afterwards, we'll take a little break. I'm going to have to take a bathroom break. I've been drinking too much water to prep for my blood test tomorrow. And I already have to pee.
Yeah, Kate, I don't know when this skull was dated to. So I don't know if it's old enough to say that it was an axe or a broadsword or a sword or what. It could be very possible that it was an axe also.
But yeah, axes is one of those that have the dual sharp force and blunt force within the weapon, because some of the, depending on what time period of axe we're talking about, like especially when you get to like later ones that are like the really nice iron that are thin, they have the really big point, but they're also freaking huge, and they have that kind of heft to it.
Right. Yeah, I found that picture online and I just used it, so I don't even know when it dates to. Okay, I'll give them a couple more minutes to get to the resources if they want to do it. You can go ahead and change the next slide, though.
Okay. I have to pull up the resources. I'm behind. I don't know where it is, though. Oh, you know what? I'm stupid. Just click the link, Melissa. Oh, no. Go back. Go back. Okay. We're okay. We're Gucci.
So while everyone's doing this, I'm going to talk about the skull for a little bit.
Talk
So
about that skull. Yeah.
If you zoom in a little bit, well, I'm not going to tell you to zoom in, but if you look at a little bit closely, some of the skull actually has some green deposits on it.
Here
that,
on the brow.
Yeah, so on the brow, and if you look a little bit further back on the temporal bone, you can actually see a little bit back there also. That's actually going to be from artifacts. Typically, that's going to be from iron.
Iron artifacts. Welcome back, Maddie Holmes. We are doing a little
copper,
activity. Maddie's probably gonna have fun with this. Maddie's probably gonna kick all our butts, but that's okay. We love our butts to get kicked by other professionals. Every time Greg shows up and kicks my butt on Ancient Egypt Pyramid Talk. If you go to the second link, there are some age estimation and sex estimation charts. And Mark will lead us through this activity to sex and age this skull.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start.
Yeah, go for it.
So, looking at the skull and looking at the resources, you can see 1, 2, 3 of the components that we would normally use for estimating sex based off the skull. Does someone want to put on a poll asking people to put either male, female, or ambiguous?
Yeah, Ashley or Haley. That would be great. So male, female, or I don't know.
Ambiguous.
Ambiguous.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know. We will never claim that we can always tell like so quickly. I mean, and as time will go on, it will get even vaguer and vaguer, and isn't it just crazy to think, isn't it, but in certain aspects, isn't it crazy to think that in like 10 to 50 years, somebody's gonna have to rewrite all of the standards? Or like the calculations and stuff?
So the standards that we've been using, that I'm using especially for all of these, are actually in the standards for what is that actually called? I can't remember the entire freaking name of the book. It's in the interesting readings. So it's Standards for Data Collection of Human Skeletal Remains. And it's Dijkstra and Ubelacher, 1994, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, God.
Yeah, we haven't updated it really since then.
And I always think 1994 is very recent, but that's 1 year older than me, and I am older than I remember I am. Almost 30 years ago.
Nearly 30 years ago.
Oh.
And we haven't really updated it much since. Yeah, so if anyone wants to guess on what they believe,
feel free to guess in the poll. I'll give some hints. I'll point out where you guys should be looking on the chart. Yeah. So you should be looking this portion, the back of the skull, which is called the nuchal crest. We don't have a mastoid, which is the jawbone, so don't look at the mastoid.
Mandible.
I do that every time. This is the mastoid.
Yeah.
This little pointy part. We don't have a mandible, which is the jaw, so don't look at that. Oh no, Cade guessed wrong. It's okay. It's a learning curve. It's fine. Then look at the supraorbital margins, which are kind of hard to see from this angle because obviously we're just looking at a picture. Then what's the other one?
Glabella. It's the supraorbital ridge. So it's the forehead.
I assume the forehead. Yeah, so look at the forehead. And then, yeah, and we don't have the mental eminence because it's the jaw. Yeah. Nobody's going to get an F. We would never give anybody an F. Never. I mean,
let's see.
In other concepts, maybe. But not in a lecture. Never. Oh. Alright.
I don't know how long these polls stay up.
I don't know how long Haley or Ashley went for it.
Yeah.
It's almost done. The poll is anonymous, so we won't know who said what. Exactly! Even better. No one will get an F. Haley, I'll give you an F for female. 3 minutes?
Yeah, I'd say next time do like 1 minute.
Yeah, we'll do it quick.
Yeah, like
Can you do like a minute and a half or something? Maybe a minute.
Well, I'm thinking like put the picture up, let them look at it for a couple minutes.
Oh, let them. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah,
like,
do it for a minute, but it's almost done now.
Yep. Okay, so everyone who guessed female would be correct.
Yay! 71%. Good job, guys.
It is a female based off of my assessments looking at it. So if you look at the nuchal crest area, it's completely smooth. There's nothing there. There's a slight little bump, but that's just typical part of the skull. The mastoid process right under the ear is very, very tiny. If it was ambiguous, it might be a little bit longer than that. The glabella goes straight up.
Straight up.
The margins we can't see. So, in my professional opinion, this is a female.
Yay!
So, good job for everyone who guessed female. And
71% of you.
Cade, I'm guessing you meant to say female.
It's okay, Cade. Cade realized the mistake. It looked female-y. Yep. And that's unfortunately, that's what a lot of people also say. It's just like if you read any of the textbooks, especially the older ones, they're like, they're light and fever, and I'm like, okay, that's like, I know I have a big head. Like, if my head, like, I had to say it, I feel like my head would be a little ambiguous if you looked at it. I have a big head. I have kind of a, I don't know. See, this is the other problem, is that, like, if you guys ever see when they do facial reconstructions, they put tissue markers on the skull to see how deep the tissue is. So in my head, I'm like, I feel like I have a big brow. Like, I just feel like it comes out very sharply, but I don't understand that there is also a good layer of muscles and skin and stuff. So sometimes it's hard to, like, I think that my skull probably looks male, but that's probably just all the extra stuff, the extra muscles and stuff.
Yeah, if anyone in here has seen the TV show Bones, they'll occasionally do it the old school way instead of the holographic BS that we actually do not use.
Yeah.
Where they would put little markers on the skull based off of where there should be tissue. And from there we can guess what the person looked like. But it's also a very hard subject to do because, again, that's also highly dependent on race, which we don't do anymore.
And diet, and, like, I mean, I think it's funny that, like, probably half of those ones that they make of, like, medieval people, they make them look so healthy. And I'm like, do we know if that person was, like, actually starving and, like, so sick and, like, really, really thin? Like, they wouldn't, no right mind person who's, like, going to be releasing this to the public is going to show this poor, like, little sickly, except of course when they did the 3D reconstruction of Tut, but that's they got a lot of criticism for a lot of different reasons.
And Maddie, you are 100% correct. Sexing is all about statistical analysis. So there is a lot of people, a lot of bioarchaeologists and forensic anthropologists today who use PCA, or principal components analysis, whenever they're doing their sex estimation, because that helps to narrow down a little bit more securely. And yes, there was a century during medieval England where there was a height drop because of famines and the plague, mostly.
The plague.
Okay, next slide.
All right. Here's another skull, y'all. Everyone take a look.
This one is a little bit trickier because it's not as clear.
Yeah, the angle's a little hard.
So, yeah, so this one, it's...
Do your best.
Yeah, this one's just harder for me to do.
Yeah, it's at the
so
angle.
If someone wants to do poll for this one.
Yeah, put up a poll for male, female, or I don't know. Also, are these, what do they call them? Roman,
brooches.
Well, they're not just brooches. They're the weird toga clips. It's got a weird specific name that...
Oh, I have no clue.
Oh, I'm looking it up because I'm like, it's a word for something else, and that's why I never remember it, because see, that gives me the whole totally wrong. Roman toga brooches. What are they freaking called? Oh, fibulas. They're called fibulas.
Yeah, that's
what it is.
Yeah.
I'm like, cloches is close, Maddie, but no, it's fibulas, because every time I'm like, fibula? You mean the bone?
Yeah.
But no, it looks like your fibula, so they call it a fibula. I think that might be a brooch, though.
Anytime that
I'm not sure.
we have archaeologists, they will say fibulas, and we're always like, personally, I'm always like talking about the bone.
Yeah.
But they're usually talking about these.
When I was in Rome, I was like, yeah, the bone, right? Because like I had just come off of a forensic anthropology class, and I was like, yeah, we're talking about the bone. They're like, no, it's a pin. I was like, oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, poll is finished.
Got
so
67%
say female, 33 say male. So this one, personally, I would say female. But
I would agree, in my unprofessional opinion.
but with the angle and the preservation, it's hard to say.
Mm-hmm.
So you might have, for instance, just a portion of the skull. If you have just the mastoid process and the area around it,
Mm-hmm.
you might have that, and that's it, to say what you guess this person might be, which is bad. But I would say there's a lot of ambiguity. Yes, Maddie, 100%.
For sure.
The mastoid process is a little bit longer on this one. There isn't a nuchal crust.
Yeah, it's pretty rounded. And the forehead's pretty smooth. They're pretty kind of straight up. But it is a chunky jaw, I will say. That is a...
Yeah, I wish this one had a front angle so I could see it.
It's like, it's a very, very pronounced jaw, which is interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so next.
Pelvis. Half of pelvis.
So now we're gonna do what we call if you only have one portion of it, do you remember what it's called?
No.
An innominate.
Innominate.
Yeah. So if you only have one portion, because like I said, the pelvis comes in 3 different parts whenever it's fully fused. You have the left, the right, and the sacrum.
The sacrum.
And whenever you're growing up, it actually comes in 1, 2, 3 parts for each of side of the pelvis, and then the sacrum has 5 plus the coccyx, so 6-ish.
So looking at this part of this is the back part, this is your butt, and this is the front.
Yeah, so the thicker portion of the pelvis, which I don't know you're pointing at, so I can't say, the thicker portion is going to be the part that you sit on.
Yeah.
The portion that you're seeing right here in this front picture is going to be the front portion of the pubis. So this is another thing that we use to help do age estimation, which I didn't teach because that's a lot harder to do.
Yeah. So poll is up. Look at the resources. I remember when my brother has at one point had a heart murmur, and so when he would go to a cardiologist, and my mom sent me once, and he did an x-ray of like my chest, and at the very tip he could see the top of my pelvis, and apparently there's a portion, which I think you'll probably be able to tell me the actual name of it, there's a portion where the bone kind of fills in over time until you get to a certain age, and the guy looked at me, and when he looked at it, he was like, oh yeah, you're almost full, meaning that you're pretty much almost stopped growing, like height-wise, or like with puberty or whatever, because I was probably in high school or something, and the guy told me that I was almost done, that I wasn't gonna grow anymore, like get taller, and I was so upset. I was like, what the heck, what do you mean? And I didn't understand it at all at that point. But I didn't grow any taller, and guess what? I've shrunk an inch, so it was pretty accurate, unfortunately.
I mean, I guess he could be talking about the acetabulum, but I don't know.
I can't remember what it was. He just said that there was this portion of your bone, that of your pelvis, that you could see when it filled in. It's very interesting, and I would love to know what he actually was talking about, but I just remember very early, like, I'm like, I don't understand what you're saying, but you're just saying I'm not gonna grow anymore.
Okay, so 80% said female. Those 80% would be correct.
Yes.
Maybe a little bit of ambiguity with this one also, because the opening for the greater sciatic notch is not as wide as I would think, but I would probably put this as female if I only had this one portion.
Haley, that's not even, that is exactly what it was. It wasn't that I did get my heart looked at, but that's 100%. I got my back x-rayed because I also have scoliosis. That's what he was telling me about. When I was getting that examined, he also looked at my pelvis. I can't believe I forgot about that. I forget that I have scoliosis because it's so minor.
So if you look at that picture again, where that white piece of paper is,
the tag is,
that's another thing that we can actually use to help age. So that's the preauricular surface, and we use that to tell an estimate of how old someone is. Okay, next slide. So again, pelvis, but this time we have both sides and the sacrum. But you only have part of the sacrum because you don't have the coccyx on the bottom.
No coccyx.
Which I love saying, coccyx.
Coccyx is a great word, especially how it's weirdly spelled. I don't know if I could really spell it. Like, I'm like, in my head, I'm like trying, it's got a Y and an X, doesn't it?
Yeah, so it's C-O-C-C-Y-X.
C-O-C-C? Oh, I was not going to spell it that way, but I'm a horrible speller, so that's fine. I once saw a record of a guy who was at 18 was 5'4", and at 21 was well over 6'5". Yeah, that's because guys grow, like, that's my brother. That's literally my brothers. My brothers... No, I guess my brothers weren't 5'4" at 18. My brothers were definitely, they grew very, very quickly. I was already the tallest kid in my entire grade in, I think, the end of 3rd grade and 4th grade. I was taller than all the boys. And then they did not start growing until about 6th grade. So it was me and this one girl, also ironically named Melissa, and we were both the tallest kids in the entire 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. So I got very cocky in the early days, and then everyone started shooting up around me. And then I went to high school with all of these huge basketball players, and I was like, what happened? I am a short person, and now I have a short person mentality when I'm with other people.
I just noticed I didn't do an age estimation activity.
That's fine.
Age is harder to do.
Age is so much harder. I'm not gonna make everyone look at teeth and like and compare the teeth thing.
Yeah, no, you would have to have 10 minutes for that.
Oh yeah.
All right. So it is done, and you are correct. It is male.
Yes.
This is,
you guys are
this
so
is based
good.
off of just the pubis area.
Just
so
the
it's
pubis.
Like this, rather than flaring out.
Yeah, V rather than a U.
Yeah.
Which that is still very ambiguous because they both look exactly the same, but yeah. Age is not fun. That's your next lecture, Mark, says Maddie. We'll do a whole one about age. We've already talked about doing a whole one about trauma, so we might as well do one.
Well, my next lecture that I want to do is my dissertation.
That's also true, yeah. We also need to get everyone's dissertations in and stuff.
Yeah. So that's for sure the next one that I would want to do. Okay, so next slide.
Oh.
Okay, this one.
Sad.
This one. Let's not do a poll for this one. Let's just talk through it.
Yeah,
this one's a little bit harder to do a poll on.
No poll for this one.
So, with this, do you want to circle where the trauma is on the full skull?
Yep. There's actually a number. That's interesting. I don't know. I don't think anyone in chat can read that, but there's 7, 8, either 1 or 4 above this injury. Looks like.
So usually what happens, what usually happens is that's just a categorization number. So they use that for whenever it's being put into storage.
That makes sense.
So it doesn't get lost from all the rest. So we'll typically number all of the bones from one individual with the same number. So if it gets commingled, which means if it gets jumbled all together, we can sort it out easier.
I would assume they wouldn't have written it directly in pencil like this one looks like it is, but
Yeah.
a lot. I had to do that when I had to label artifacts, and you do it with an interesting version of clear nail polish that you can easily wipe away.
Yeah.
If need
be. A lot of them used to do that too, yeah. This, writing on it, we try not to do anymore for that very reason.
For the very reason.
Okay, so there's 3 that we can see on here for sure. All of this is going to be mostly... Oh, you haven't circled it yet?
No, I accidentally rolled my little mouse roller and it switched slides, but we're fine. We're fine.
So there's 3. You have 1 over the right eye orbit, which would be left if you look at it straight on. 1 right above the forehead, like right on the forehead. It looks like it might actually be a little bit of green, so it probably had some type of copper associated with it. And then you have the one right on top. This one actually is a little bit harder because if you look at the picture to the left of it on the bottom, that is a close-up version of it. So that one looks like it penetrated a little bit. So this one, I would say, it's mostly blunt force trauma with maybe some sharp force if you look at both of the pictures.
Yeah, definitely head trauma.
Okay, next one.
Oh, look at those cranial sutures. Sorry.
I'm going to talk about cranial sutures here in a second because I forgot to do it already.
It's okay. They look really cool in this picture.
With this one, you have multiple. This is actually pointing them out, so I'm not going to worry about it. So C is pointing out a couple of different striations that's mostly going to be sharp force trauma. This person did probably not live through this because I don't see much remodeling done. F is, I believe, pointing to the big, opening in the head. So that's going to be probably a combination of blunt force and sharp force. And D, I think, is pointing to a striation, but I can't tell. It's a very bad picture.
Yeah.
So with this one, I would say it's a combination of both blunt and sharp, especially with the big hole.
Remind me, is a gunshot wound sharp force or blunt force trauma? Do you know?
Neither.
Neither? Oh, well, there we go.
No. So gunshot wound is going to be something completely different. That's just going to be... I don't think I said that's supposed to be a gunshot wound.
Well, I guess in my like, from my vague couple classes of forensic anthropology, this weirdly could be a gunshot wound, and it's definitely going into it, not coming out of it, because you can see how these 2 pieces of the bone are bent inwards. So like, I would say, like, this is not 100%. Mark picked those photos, but this is like a possibility in this case because it is such a gaping wound and the pieces of bone are totally missing. But I was just curious if yeah, no, it's definitely too large for sure. But I was just curious if that is if it's considered sharp force or blunt force. But I guess if it's neither, then that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, so with gunshot wounds, what you can tell with gunshot wound is if it has striations. So whenever you have a gunshot, it's spinning. So it's going to have a striation, I can never remember, on the outside for the entrance wound, on the inside for the exit wound, if it has an exit wound.
Yeah.
So this doesn't have striations at all.
Yeah. No.
It could also be, I don't think this is it, but it could be trepanation. Trepanation is where you drill into the head to help relieve pressure. And a lot of, if you go back in antiquity far enough, they actually believed that it was a way to get rid of demons if someone was possessed. It was also used in a lot of early psychiatric facilities as a way to try and relieve people of their psychiatric issues, which sadly a lot of females were put into psychiatric hospitals because men are disgusting humans. Yeah. So
all of our problems were because we were hysterical.
Pretty much. My undergrad had what was called an insane asylum back in the day. Associated with it. It was on top of the hill right outside of our university. And now it's part of the university. There's actually offices there and a museum. So yeah.
Cool.
So that's everything for the activities.
All right. So let us go back to just chatting. And okay. So feel free to ask any questions about anything we just learned. I am going to take a quick bathroom break. Mark can handle everything for just a second. And then we'll come back with, I'm going to make it quick because, well, we'll figure out. I am going to do a lecture looking more, we're taking all of this knowledge that we have from bioarchaeology, and we're going to talk about Mallory is planning a trip where all three of us go to Egypt, and I'm just like, I'm very much in it, but I'm like, I need money, and I need COVID to be over.
So
November. But so I'm going to give a presentation about a recent study that just came out literally like 2 months ago, about the CT scan, the first ever CT scans of the mummy of Pharaoh Amenhotep I. And so we'll take all of this bioarchaeology knowledge, and then I will kind of decipher it into what the differences and the similarities between mummy studies and that. So give me 1 second. Mark, you have the floor. I'll be right back.
Yeah. Okay, Haley, we'll make sure that we take you with with us, whenever we go. So something I didn't get to mention that I was going to. So she was talking about the sutures on the skull. So that's another way that we can estimate age. But it's also very highly dependent on all of those things that I mentioned earlier: environment, DNA, diet, everything. So we don't use it as much either. It's okay, Ashley, you're coming too. Don't worry. Did anyone have any questions? Could be about what we talked about now, or about anything else bioarch related questions. Oh, I do have some questions I need to answer actually, now that I'm thinking of it.
Okay, so, I got a great idea.
I forgot we did have questions that people asked in the Discord.
Oh yeah, we can definitely pull those
I have them written down already.
Okay, perfect.
So
okay. Charlie, sorry, thank you so much, Charlie, for, oh my god, I'm sorry, everyone can't see us. Okay, Charlie, thank you so much for putting the helping me to fix my audio. I love you.
So Mallory, bioarchaeology in general, what prereqs do you think are beneficial for concentrating on bioarchaeology? So I didn't have any specific prereqs whenever I started my anthropology degree. I took osteology, which clearly you have to have. I took forensic anthropology, even though it wasn't required, but it's nice to have, so then you can learn all the traumas, because you don't learn that in osteology. And then I took a lot of disease-oriented classes. So, like plagues and people I took, which just talked about different diseases in the past, which was my favorite class ever. It'd be good to take some type of genetics class if you can. Other than that, I would suggest doing something zooarch if your department has a zooarch class. So at animal remains rather than humans, taking that so you can differentiate between humans and animals a little bit easier. But really, osteology, take it.
Yeah. And depending on where you are, like, I did not take a full osteology class, but I took 2 forensic anthropology classes in which a large amount of the coursework was everyone go over the bones, make sure you know all the bones, you're gonna have a bones quiz. And so I don't know a lot of the like I pretty much, although it's been years since I've done this, at that time I did know all the bones, and was pretty good at memorizing all of them, but I know like certain parts we didn't learn some of the specifics, but depending on where your university is and what they offer, you can usually find a lot of these topics in some other kind of classes that they'll be covered in the areas.
Yeah, so whenever you take osteology, it's not even just learning just the bones. So like Melissa's saying, there's a lot of aspects about each individual bone that you will have to learn. So,
Yeah.
for instance, as I was mentioning right whenever Melissa was coming back, the sutures that I kept on forgetting to mention for aging, each of the sutures have their own name.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, for instance, the sagittal crust, which is the sagittal suture, which is going to be going straight back. It used to be called a crust because if you look at gorillas, they have a really big one, and that's for muscle attachments. So we don't have one anymore, so it's just called sagittal suture. Coronal suture, and that's because that's where the crown goes. Stuff like that. It's actually fairly easy whenever you have tricks to learn them. And then for the carpals, we have a very fun saying that we like to use. I don't know if you learned them whenever you took osteology.
Probably not.
So it's some lovers try positions that they can't handle.
We definitely did not learn that one. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So you have multiple wrist bones, and each of them corresponds with the first letter of each word. So some lovers try positions that they can't handle.
Wow. Yeah. Our class was essentially, the first one we took was very general, and we covered a lot of different topics in it. And then the second class I took, which was taught by the same lady, she went over a lot of the same things just in case people hadn't taken the first course. But the coolest part of our second course was that it took her forever to get permission, and she had been wanting to do this for years, but she had to like get permission from the university. She made us a mock crime scene just in one of the fields, like behind one of the buildings, and like put out all of the bones and everything, and then we had to fill out the whole investigation sheets and do all this stuff, and that was like so much fun, and I did not expect to like learn so much. And she was able to bring us bones as well, because although we technically had an anthropology lab, it was all models, and it was all like old like Neanderthals, hominids, like I think there was probably maybe 2 human skulls in there, but they were both fake. The anthropology lab had been a closet.
Anatomically modern.
Modern.
Yeah, so my undergrad, we mostly used casts from bone clones, which is where most anthropologists / archaeology programs get their teaching materials from. Thankfully, when I came here, we don't have as many rules in the UK when it comes to human remains. So we were able to use human remains that are being curated in the department. So whenever I took osteology here again, my individual was a monk.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So cool.
He was old, like upwards of 60 or so years old at least. He had severe back issues because there's a disease that was in the back and the spine that I could see. He had arthritis, everything. There's the huge difference between US and UK is that here it's not frowned upon as much to use real human remains when teaching.
Which is very interesting, because I don't know where my professor got those. Because we worked on our second course, we looked at two sets of human remains. Now, she was the forensic at the time of the first course I took. She was the forensic anthropologist for the city of New York. Had headed up the 9/11 excavation and repatriation project. And then by the time I took the second course, she was the head forensic anthropologist for the whole entire state of Connecticut. And so she brought them to us, and so she obviously had them in her collection. Obviously not her collection, like it must have been Connecticut State collection, I'm not sure. But she had 2 sets, and one was a more modern set, and then one was probably closer to 70 years old or so, and that was one, it had a lot of trauma to it, and unfortunately the bones were also just not in a very good condition. And now that I'm remembering it, I actually don't think they were from America. I think they were from somewhere else. And she told us a story about how somebody else obtained them and then they were donated, or some horrible story that just like makes you so sad thinking that someone's just getting shuffled around. But it was very interesting to learn from them because there was so much trauma, and the person unfortunately had never been identified, and it most likely was a lynching victim. And it was very, very hard, but very interesting to see how trauma affects the bones, even though some trauma obviously only affects your flesh, but some stuff is just goes a little deeper. It was just very hard, but very interesting to learn about.
So Haley asks, does bioarchaeology cover frozen bodies? How would you deal with preserving flesh? So, I don't know if you heard, a couple of decades ago, I can't remember when exactly, in Austria, I think, they found Uzi, which was
it's either Austria
mummy.
or it's real North Italy, but it's the Alps.
I can't remember.
I think it was the Alps. So, one of those.
I'm Googling it.
Uzi, our frozen mummy, he's like this.
He's on the border between Austria and Italy.
I knew it. I'm like it's real North Italy. I'm like, I don't know where it is, but it's real close. But
so technically his body was frozen. His flesh was still there. He's one of the first individuals that's that old, because Uzi was dated to 3230 BCE.
30 BC. Yeah.
5,200 years ago almost.
And that, I'm looking, I have to look at my my timeline of ancient Egyptian history because I am bad at dates. So yeah, 3200, so that is right before the pre-dynastic age in Egypt, which in the pre-dynastic age, mummification was really bad and has not been preserved now. So he is almost one of probably the oldest mummies in the sense that he was mummified by freezing, by extremely cold temperatures rather than extremely hot temperatures.
So with Uzi, since we have his skin still available, we can actually see all the tattoos that he had.
He had so many cool tattoos.
So, if I'm not mistaken, a good portion of his body was tattooed, not just small things like I have.
His shoulders, I think, and his arms, I think, or something.
I'm gonna find a picture, post it. Okay, so again, I'm going to give you a trigger warning for this. So these are some of his
if you put
tattoos.
the link in here, I can pull it up so everyone can see it. But yes.
Well, I'm on my computer now, so I can actually post it. Yeah.
It's a UT.
OTZI.
OTZI.
Yeah.
All right. Let me open image and new tab.
So while you're doing that,
here we go.
I think there was another question.
Yeah, Charlie asked, what is the difference between learning on casts and actual bones?
So
is it very different?
Casts are good because you have the full thing there. Bone, it depends on how preserved they are and how bad the soil is acidically, but you can have a small portion of the bone to work with, which makes it harder to learn them. But it does help because that's all you're going to typically find in archaeological digs is small portions of it. So, in my opinion, learning on real bone is better.
So here's some of the tattoos of Uzi. There are lots of little lines. Kind of, I'm assuming this is his back because this is his spine. Yeah. So we got some lines here. He's got a little bracelet line. I think this is his elbow. No, this might be his knee. I think this is his knee. It's very hard, but here he is. This is a reconstruction of him. I think this might be a 3D scan of him. But I think this is marking all of the tattoos. Yeah, it has the world's oldest tattoos. So yeah.
Yeah.
Open image, a new tab.
So, Haley, a lot of the tattoos, a lot of people have posited that he might have been a tribe, well, not tribal, but like a community elder or something.
Mm-hmm.
And these tattoos could be denoting his status within the community.
All right. I wanted to look at what Maddie said for a second. My school has a full female skeleton as a murder victim, and the family didn't want her remains, so the professor basically adopted her and kept her in the department. The issue was that they found it in one country, but both countries claimed it. Oh, goodness. So they were physically checked the boundary line. Oh, sorry, you're talking about Utsi now. That they found it in one country, but both countries claimed it. So they went physically checked the boundary lines and realized that all of the maps had been wrong up until then. That's why there's a big confusion about the country of origin. Well, if it's up in the high mountains, the maps are bad. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's actually a Egyptologist who, and now I can't remember which one it is because she was on one of my Woman Crush Wednesdays. I think it's Amelia Edwards. This old Egyptologist from, I guess, probably Victorian age and on. She and her female companion, who was pretty much confirmed to be her girlfriend at the time, went and traveled the Alps in a place that had not been mapped. And she and this girl and their guide went along for months and tracked through the Alps. And I'm like, what? Amelia and her roommate. Yes, Amelia and her roommate. I'm not even joking you. Amelia, I think this is Amelia Edwards. Amelia, like, this is literally... Amelia Edwards is this huge, like, figure in, like, early Egyptology. And when I was doing my Woman Crush Wednesday posts, I literally was like, wait a second. Like, she's like a total out lesbian. And I literally messaged all my friends because we're from a very amazing, like, LGBT group mix of friends. And I was like, did anybody else know that, like, Amelia Edwards was confirmed LGBTQ? And, yeah, what, she lived with Ellen Drew Brasher, a widow, 27 years her senior, who lost her husband and daughter not long after Edward's parents had died, and they became companions, and I believe they're buried together, which is very sweet. All right, y'all. If anybody doesn't have any other questions that are, like, more specific to what, Haley, anyone want to be female companions with me? Anyone want to trace the Alps together? Always.
We still have the questions from Discord real fast.
Yeah, go for it. Let's do those.
Okay, so Haley in the Discord asked, are human bodies given any special treatment during the excavation process that other living beings, such as animals, would not get?
That's a very good question.
Technically, yes. So, I'll take it from a European perspective, and then I'll take it back to an American one. So, in Europe, typically, especially in the UK, if you come across human remains, they're going to be hidden directly from the public. We will put a tent over it, we'll put it in, like, we'll actually construct an entire building, like a removable building, to hide it from view. And it also helps to keep it out of direct sunlight, because direct sunlight is actually bad for bone.
Yep.
So we will do those. We will use certain tools to excavate human remains more than we will for animal remains. So whenever I was doing my excavation in Italy, we would use dental tools, like metal dental tools, to excavate with. But dental tools actually is not good for human bone, because if you scratch the bone, whatever's on the dental tool can actually transfer over to the bone. So we try not to use that as much as we can, but it's a lot easier to excavate it that way. Animal bone, we just excavate it however we normally would. Especially if it's just like a small piece of bone for animal, we won't do anything special with it. If it's a full animal bone like we had on the third slide, I think it was, whenever I was showing the differences between UK and US bioarchaeology, that horse or whatever it was fully excavated how we would do a human. Now, in the US, this is where it gets tricky. As I said earlier, with human remains, if you find one, you stop, you do nothing else, you call the coroner, you wait for them to come, you talk about it, then you can excavate it. But if it's Native American, you typically don't touch it at all.
Yep.
Unless you absolutely have to. So in the US, we have what's called NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Let me type that out, because that's a lot of words.
That's a lot of words.
So
also,
Native
Maddie, I looked up the Women's Anthropological Society of America, and I'm going to be reading so much more about this, because I've never heard of this, and this looks very amazing.
So in the US, we have NAGPRA. So NAGPRA prohibits us from excavating Native American graves, and if we absolutely have to, those remains have to be repatriated and given back to the native population that they would have belonged to. The issue with NAGPRA is that it doesn't specify whom the remains actually belong to, because if you go down to Mississippi, where I lived for a while, the tribe boundaries have fluctuated too much, and a lot of the tribes actually are not around anymore.
Yep.
So who do those remains go to? So the university, Mississippi State University, has Native American graves there, Native American remains there still, that we can't repatriate because we can't associate it with anyone. And we only associate it with someone based on grave goods. Really, that's about it, grave goods. And if a local tribe can make a good argument why they are more associated with them. And then if you talk to some archaeologists and bioarchaeologists in the US, they actually have stories where they have received the blessing from the tribes to do research, but what they'll actually do is whenever they do the research, a lot of archaeologists, since we don't have money, let's be honest,
we don't.
We'll use French fry carriers, like the small bowls.
Yeah.
And we'll put like small bones in that. And what she would do, it's Anna Osterholtz at Mississippi State University, who studied under one of the top bioarchaeologists in the US. What she would do is she would repatriate the bowls also, because it touched human remains.
Yep.
She would repatriate the markers because they touched human remains.
Amazing.
Everything. Anything that came into contact with the remains, she would repatriate so they can just bury it all.
That's
or
amazing.
Do with it how they will. Because how she views it is they're giving me permission to study their ancestors in a way that no one else has ever been able to.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
For those in the chat, I just put up this website called nativeland.ca.canada. And it's a interactive map where you can look at whose land you are living on. And it's extremely interesting, and it's actually the globe, like obviously Europe and Asia in some instances, like some of them are very empty. But you can kind of look in. I think you can actually search your address, I think. Yeah, you can. You can literally search your exact address to see what native land is on. And I hope this is just a very interesting very interesting map that's extremely cool. And I don't actually know. Oh, it's called Native Land Digital. And you can support them by helping add to the map and learning more about the nations, which is very cool. All right. Any other questions from the Discord?
Oh yeah, there was like 5 in there. I'm getting ready to go to the next one. So Silver Sunset is not here.
They were here earlier, but they probably took ahead.
They asked a couple questions. So, again, if you've watched Bones, you'll see this episode. So, how often are items licked during an excavation to determine if they are stone or bone?
Stone or bone?
Easy answer, never. So,
Never.
There's an episode of Bones. There's an episode of Bones where she went into a a storage locker, or sort of storage locker. It was archaeologist who was really just a treasure hunter and who's bringing things back for a museum that was a biblical museum.
Not like any real museums out there in the world that all my friends are like, or all my mom is like, you should get a job there. I'm like, over my dead body.
Not happening.
I genuinely did have to ask my friend though, like, would I be exiled from the community if I got a job there? And she was just like, and she had a very specific answer, yes, and that is truly because one of her professors was screwed over in the project because he had been asked to look at not the tablets, but other objects that that organization had probably illegally purchased. And he's like, I don't read cuneiform, but he got roped into like the lawsuit and all that, and almost like his career went under. And so she had a very personal, she was like, I think you should definitely not do that. And I was like, okay, that's what I was thinking. I'm just like curious, like what the academics actually think about it, because I feel like I haven't heard a lot of academics talk about it. I've only heard about like people being like, ban Hobby Lobby. And I'm like, okay.
I mean, considering Hobby Lobby is the reason that the Bible Museum in Kentucky has most of their stuff.
Yeah.
But okay, so in that episode of Bones, where she walks in, she walks into the storage locker and she ended up picking up something, wasn't sure what it was, put it on her tongue, and what bone does is it's a very porous thing. So if it's porous and it's going to stick to your tongue. Technically, that is accurate. They used to do that. Today, I have a different method to do. Instead of putting it on my tongue, I use my trowel and slightly tap it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And rock, it clinks. Bone, it won't clink.
Oh, clink. Yeah. That makes sense.
Simple. Don't have to lick the
I will admit, in the past, I have played the stone or bone game, but I now know better from lots of. And I will admit, the majority of the time we played the stone or bone game, it was always stone. It was never bone. Like, I hate to say it, it just like every time I found something, it would always be like the sharpest, like the flattest like stone that I'm like, this has to be like the smooth side of like a long bone with the rough side of the inside, and I'm like, that's gotta be what it is. And then it's always a stone. I'm like, well, I love it. We've all licked it. It's just like everyone's tried, all these archaeologists have tried it once, and now we're realizing that it's a bad decision.
Pretty much.
Do not lick the science. Exactly.
There's a really cool picture. Oh, let's see.
Sinks in water, right? Bone. Bone
should float.
Bone should float. It's more porous, yeah.
Yeah.
But it also shouldn't be soaking in water because it's more porous. So
correct.
It's like,
you never want to soak bone.
Yeah, so like when you go through like and you're cleaning all your artifacts, you always organize the bone separate, and usually you use either a dry brush or a very, very lightly damp brush, but you don't soak it. Like other like pieces of pottery, stone, not iron, because iron gets totally dry brushed, but like most other things, you just shove it in a bucket and it can just soak for a while and then clean it with a toothbrush. But now, Kate, don't lick your samples.
So I just posted a meme that I
I was literally thinking about this. Wait, everyone has to see this. This is my favorite. Can you lick science? An abbreviated list. Genetic, don't. Chemistry, definitely don't. Archaeology, perhaps, but might be human bone. Geology, sometimes needed, sometimes dangerous. Psychology, best not. Physics, how do you lick physics? In zoology, science licks you. Charlie's Dragon is literally, that's like the best line. Anthropology, maybe ask first. Herpetology, which is reptiles?
I think so, yeah.
Reptiles, bad plan. Sociology, yes, if you have time and dedication and willingness to piss a lot of people off. Botany, you might hallucinate or die, or it might be delicious. Makes sense. Computer engineering, the tingle of electricity on your tongue is how you know it's working. Epidemiology, which I don't know what that is.
It's the study of diseases.
Diseases, yes. For the sake of the world, please do not. Linguistics, despite the name, please probably don't. Even though it's like linguistics. Engineering, maybe, but it'll probably taste like spreadsheets. Computer science, nothing else has made the code work, so you might as well try it. I love that meme, especially because of the zoology science licks you. Like as soon as somebody typed that in, I was like, in my head, I was like, science licks you back.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome,
Next
Ask a Scientist Gaming. Artificial sweeteners were discovered by chemists licking a sample. No way. Really? That's crazy. That can't be. Please, I mean, you're a scientist, so I have to kind of believe you, but that is crazy. I would never lick anything in chemistry. It terrifies me too much. Hi, Naderfiend. Okay. That's a good question, and I will save that after the Egyptology lecture.
So I have 2 more questions real fast.
No. Yeah, go for it.
Do they still use marrow versus fat content of lung bones to determine someone's age? Back in the day, they used to. Today, they really don't. We have other methods that is easier because with the marrow versus fat content, you need to use microscopes and other technology that most of us don't have. So we use teeth, fusion of bones, the pubis, and the auricular surface to do it all, but that's just too much. And then, is there any other way to determine age over 45 to 50? So, as I was saying earlier, there's really, once you hit about 45, it gets harder and harder and harder to estimate age. So, tooth wear, people still use, but I don't like to. And then, some people will use the auricular surface, but that's also very, very hard to do. So once you hit 45, be to say 45 plus. We don't give the specific age anymore.
That's hard, man. It's such a long time, but
that's it.
All right. Very quickly, Naderfiend. How were the Hyksos able to conquer the Egyptians? They didn't really. That's a old thought that they were these kind of conquering people. They're most likely just Canaanite settlers that settled in the Nile Delta. I mean, they definitely started a huge battle with the Egyptians, and that's just essentially that they were powerful, and the Egyptians, honestly, at that point, the Egyptians were kind of weak, and so they did come out in the battle, but the Egyptians eventually came out on top. And I like how Charlie's Dragon is saying, by licking. Thank you, Charlie's Dragon. And Scientist Gaming says that it's 100% true that that's how they discovered artificial sweeteners, and my mind is absolutely blown, and I will be telling that fun fact to my parents when we get off stream, because that is so fascinating. And Cade says, so is LSD, and that I do believe. Why do I believe that? I don't know, but I do.
So, since you mentioned the Hyksos, who was it, Naderfiend? There's actually a paper that I posted in the resources.
Oh,
if you go to the
bioarchaeology.
If you go in there, if you go into the interested readings, there is a paper that I will also just directly link to that talks about the origins of the Hyksos people and how we can do it
through bioarchaeology.
Bioarchaeologically.
I need to read that. I definitely need to read that.
It didn't link directly to the paper, so I've got to find it again.
That's fine. It's in the folder. But very, very cool. Because they have been a little bit of an elusive people.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So this is the problem, is that sometimes I get very mixed up between the Hyksos and the Sea Peoples, because they're both very elusive. But I know more about the Hyksos because of Tel El Daba, which is their capital city of Avaris, and they have the super cool Minoan bull jumping scenes, and showing that there was some connection to the Minoan people from Crete. But it most likely is a group of Canaanite people, Canaanite being Israel, Palestine, Syria area, literally immigrating over the Sinai Peninsula and then straight into the Delta. Yes, Charlie's Dragon, they do have colorful coats, and it's not 100% sure if that image of them with the really colorful coats, that image is where we get the name Hyksos, but Hyksos is technically and definitely not what they called themselves. We don't really know how they kind of called themselves. The Hyksos in that depiction, I think that's... Ooh, I'm so close to remembering. That's from a... It's from a tomb painting. It's not even a temple painting. It's a tomb painting depicting this group of people. I'm going to pull it out of a hat. It might be Khnumhotep III. I don't know how I'm pulling that out there, but it might be that one. But they are depicted with these very colorful outfits. And that is the image that is typically associated with them, because there is this word that in ancient Egyptian says something along the lines of Hyksos or Hyksos. And it is where we have gotten their name for them, but we're not exactly sure if that's how they named themselves. So I think that's a very good transition into my half of the lecture, which is going to be much shorter because I did not prepare enough. We'll say this. Thank you, Charlie's Dragon, for dropping that. Oh, Khnumhotep II! I was so close! That's his dad! The Khnumhotep II is his dad. I was so close. A man described as Abisha the Hyksos. Yeah, exactly. Leading the group of Amau. That's what is probably a more accurate word as to what they are. But Heka Kasut for what we now call Hyksos. Thank you, Charlie's Dragon, for dropping that in. That's absolutely perfect. Okay, so give me 1 second while I pull up this. I hate presenter view on PowerPoints, but alas, we're here. All right, so a little bit of a less of a trigger warning. There will be CT scans and x-rays of human remains, and there's one image of a mummy, but it's all wrapped up. So it mostly will just be CT scans and x-rays. But I wanted to kind of jump off of all the amazing lecture that Mark just gave about the basics of bioarchaeology and try to give you guys a case study. Of course, it's a little hard to do a case study from bioarchaeology perspective in Egypt, because if you look at the majority of our human remains, they are all mummified, which means they have more flesh on them, which means the standard of bioarchaeology looking at bones makes it a little difficult to kind of do the sexing and the aging. But a lot of those standards are still used. They just have to kind of be tweaked and altered in a little way. This is, and Mark, always feel free to chime in on anything. I have little questions throughout it that I will ask you to get your opinion on.
I know, I remember. I read it.
You read it? Okay, perfect. But feel free to chime in at any point. So the first thing that I want to talk about, human remains disclaimer, is the difference between bioarchaeology and mummy studies. So surprisingly, both of these came out around the same time. Obviously, the study of skulls was much older, but this kind of more academic field of bioarchaeology and mummy studies emerged around the 1970s. And mummy studies is obviously very set within Egyptology. You don't really talk about mummy studies outside of Egyptology. I'm not even sure, like, obviously we have other instances of mummified remains, like bog bodies. We have mummified remains from the Americas, from South America, but I don't know if those fields of archaeology and history have something that is equivalent to mummy studies. Ancient Egypt being the biggest producer of mummies, if that makes sense, and that they were doing the most widespread cultural mummification of people, it makes sense that it's only really within Egyptology. And when it comes to mummy studies, this field kind of came about because of an interest in soft tissue pathology and learning more about the soft tissue that is left on the mummified remains. But probably similar to bioarchaeology, but probably more so, mummy studies has really struggled with establishing field-wide procedures, research protocols, and ethical guidelines. we obviously saw a lot of the different standards when it comes to examining to age and sex bones, but was it hard, Mark, to in the world of bioarchaeology to establish these standards and make them standards, I guess? Have there been times of, I guess, conflict within academia to agree on what is the best way to move forward?
I mean, it's more along the lines of more recent issues, with us realizing that some of the earlier methods that were used aren't the best. Like, for instance, the stature estimations, whenever Trotter and Glesser were using the war deceased from the Korean War and all that, we learned that not the best thing. Estimating race, not the best thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, we've gone through it and we're still going through it today. But back whenever it was first being introduced as the common methods, I don't think there was as much of a pushback as it is today. But I'm sure there was.
Yeah.
There's always going to be conflict when it comes to researchers and their research, because other people are going to think that they know better than everyone else.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of Egyptologists and a lot of, I say, there's not even a title for someone who does mummy studies, a person who studies mummies. There is this call to kind of combine mummy studies with bioarchaeology, because many of these modern studies that are coming out of mummy studies, they're actually done from a biomedical field rather than a bioarchaeology field. So they are not going to be integrating any sort of archaeological or anthropological theories into the examinations of these mummies. And that's kind of where this big gap is. And I always kind of assumed that bioarchaeology is where mummy studies is supposed to be. But it seems that a lot of papers and a lot of scholars who are still doing this are from a more medical field. And I didn't I am not a mummiologist. I would not consider myself a mummiologist, Maddie, in the sense that I did my master's in art history. So if I really wanted to center into what type of Egyptologist I am, I mainly learned through art history. I would also say that I would lean more towards an Egyptian archaeologist, because I have done archaeological work, I've done examinations, and I would love to go into more of a bioarchaeology, and I have a great interest in bones, but I have never been formally trained in it. And to be honest, I don't know if a mummiologist would be the way that I would want to, if I wanted to focus anything tighter. As it is, I don't want to focus anything into anything even tighter, because Mark's trying to convince me to come into bioarchaeology. When it comes to Egyptology, I think I'm very happy and set where I am. Where I want to kind of expand is I want to go more into museum studies and public archaeology or public education. I hate to say it, I don't want to delve too far down the Egyptian rabbit hole, because I want to be able to teach people about all different types of history. And so I'm afraid if I go too deep, I'll never be able to get back out. So I want to go a little bit more general, if I do, knock on wood, do any sort of more masters or PhDs in the future. But I think it definitely needs to be studied more, because unfortunately we have mummies are seated in colonialist and racist outcomes from the past and studies in the past, and they have been traded and sold and bought and shipped all over the world, and they need to, I think they do extensively need to be studied. There are mummies that I'm sure have this entire presentation is going to be about one of the most famous mummies, because he is a full-blown pharaoh who had never had a CT scan until literally a couple months ago. So, yeah. So I think mummy studies is very, very important, but I do think they should be integrating with bioarchaeologists, because I feel like y'all got a lot of great things to say, and I feel like y'all should also start learning in integrating more into like your standardization is learning how do you study mummies when you can't touch the actual bones. Because I think that I really hate that these two worlds are so separate, even though they are almost similar. All right, next slide. So let us look at our case study. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on this person, because this is something that I think we don't have a lot of experience, I think, in most bioarchaeology. When you're looking at a set of human remains, you don't have their entire, which we don't have his entire backstory, but we have a good chunk of his backstory, who this actual person was. So we're going to be looking at the mummy of Amenhotep I. He reigned during the early 18th dynasty in the New Kingdom. He actually wasn't expected to inherit the throne because he had two older brothers, and he ascended the throne when he was about 21 years old. We don't actually have the best record of his reign, which is not actually, it's kind of surprising for a New Kingdom where we have a lot of things preserved. But we do know that he inherited his family's successful military campaigns in Nubia and the Delta, and he was rebuilding temples and funerary monuments throughout his reign. And as with most New Kingdom pharaohs, Amenhotep I probably had a tomb built for him in either the Valley of the Kings or Thebes. But for him being one of the biggest pharaohs of the New Kingdom, his original tomb location has not been confirmed. There are two main contenders. One is a cache site, which actually I'm going to talk about. It's where his body was, or not where his body was found, but where it was believed that these cache of mummies were moved before being moved to where they were actually discovered. And then there's another tomb that is outside of the Valley of the Kings, just outside of Thebes, that is the higher contender that they believe that probably was his tomb. But it's not 100% confirmed, which is unlike a lot of the other pharaohs during this time period. So Amenhotep I's mummy was not found in his tomb, but it was actually found in Deir al-Bahri cache 320, otherwise known as DB 320 or TT 320. Do we know what happened to his older brothers? I'm not exactly sure, but I think there is theories that one of them died in a military campaign, because he is the second pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. And the 18th dynasty is the first dynasty of the New Kingdom, meaning that just before it was the second intermediate period. And during the intermediate periods, everything was a little chaotic, everything was a little crazy, and there was not one pharaoh ruling over the entire kingdom. And that's how we essentially define what an intermediate period is. And so presumably, I believe that there are theories that his brother, maybe one or maybe both, died in some sort of military campaign. But we do believe that he was the third brother, which is quite unique. We don't usually have later siblings rising to the throne very quickly. Because the other thing is that even if he had older siblings, most of the time we don't know about them. But we obviously know that he had two. We have some sort of evidence that there were older brothers, which is kind of unique about the situation. So this cache dates to the 21st dynasty. So two dynasties later, a couple hundred years later, when priests would pretty much all walked around the Valley of the Kings, discovered that all of the tombs of these kings are wide open and had been looted, because most of these tombs were looted within a couple months of the original burial. And so these priests decided that they would take out all of these royal mummies. They would rewrap them, they would place them back in the coffins, and then they put them all in a cache together. So this is a view of where this tomb is. This is Hatshepsut's mortuary temple and Mentuhotep III's mortuary temple in Deir al-Bahri. The Valley of the Kings is kind of behind this ridge, and so this is this kind of up this very steep hill is where this cache was. And you can see there was an entrance shaft, an entrance corridor, the first corridor, a niche, and then a burial chamber. And so this entire thing was full with mummies, and there were a lot coming from the 21st dynasty and the 18th dynasty as well. If I remember correctly, this is the cache that was discovered in 1881 because they had been secretly, a family called the Abed Rasul family had been secretly looting all of these items out and selling them on the black market. And supposedly when they were discovered, they said their goat fell down the hole, and that's how they discovered the tomb. And the Egyptian government was, even though these guys were working on the black market, the Egyptian government was not kind to the family at all. And there's some very horrible stuff happening on both sides of this story. But the tomb was discovered in 1881, and many of the mummies were in pretty bad condition, and they were all in different cases. The priests of the 21st dynasty tried really hard to label them correctly, and then put them back in their original coffins, but it was not successful. Most of them we've kind of deciphered which ones go where, but this is an original picture of when these sarcophagi came back to the museum. But the majority of these mummies were unwrapped in the years after 1881, mostly by Gaston Maspero, who I believe was the head of the Egyptian Museum at the time. But Amenhotep the mummy was the exception because it was thought to be so pristine and beautiful that they decided to not unwrap the mummy. So I think he is one of the only royal mummies that has never been unwrapped, which is unfortunately very sad. But he has an absolutely beautiful mummy mask and garlands of flowers. And here's a drawing of what it looks like. I'll show you pictures, don't worry. But here's a drawing of how it was found within the sarcophagus. It is now, if you guys, Maddie, we're gonna do a whole thing about that because that is part of the actual paper, is trying to determine how old he was when he died. So that is, we'll be talking about that in just a second. No, totally fine. You're totally fine. It's a good question, and it's a highly debated question because based on the 3 studies, yeah, spoiler alert, based on 3 studies, they gave all very different ages, and we'll talk about all of them. So it is now, if you guys didn't know, it is now considered very unethical and a conservationist nightmare to unwrap mummies. So mummies are no longer unwrapped, and the best way to digitally unwrap them is through x-rays and CT scans. So the mummy was first x-rayed in 1932 and then later in 1967, but just this past year it was CT scanned for the first time. So here are some images of the mummy and the sarcophagus. The mummy is in really good condition, like surprisingly good condition for its age and for it being discovered in 1881. And it not really degrading that much since then. It has this most beautiful mummy mask, which you can see it kind of sits just right here. These are all flowers that are all around and all over the mummy. It has a beautiful gold, probably gold lapis, carnelian, and maybe faience or maybe some other blue stone. These are probably alabaster eye sockets. This poor little uraeus is a little crooked, but it's a beautiful preserved sarcophagus. Just at a glance, though, it does not look 18th dynasty. It looks 3rd intermediate period, but I'm actually not sure. This might not be his coffin. This might have been the coffin he was found in, but it might not have been the one associated with him. But it is a beautiful, beautiful coffin and just an absolutely beautiful mummy. I think it's very interesting because, to me, this does not look like a male mummy mask. If he was a pharaoh, he would have had a beard. I don't know where his beard is, but there is no indication that there was ever a beard here. It's a very feminine face, which is kind of unique in that it does not look like a man's face. And while the mummy masks don't typically show a lot of gender, there are always hints of it and stuff. It's a very soft, beautiful face. All right, so now let's look at some CT scans. So, the mummy inside, obviously, all of this is slightly arbitrary because we're looking at CT scans, but from what they could tell, the mummy is in pretty good condition. He had a pretty small nose, protruding upper teeth, you can kind of see here, and then small ears, and his left ear, which would be this one, had a small piercing. He also had, which you can see really well here, you can see these coiled hair locks all across the back of his head and across the sides of his head as well. So, as Mark explained with estimating stature, he didn't ask you guys to estimate stature because you can't do it unless you have a bone. It's still kind of hard if you don't actually have a physical bone, but through the technology of a CT scan, they were able to estimate his stature at 161.5 centimeters, which is about 5'2". And they based this on the maximum length of the tibia and adding it to a specific calculation that estimates stature, with plus or minus, I think, 4 inches. 4 centimeters.
Outside of the supraorbital ridge, the rest of the skull's very effeminate looking.
And that's like, we didn't talk about this, but like a lot of those standards were made modern stuff. And so I'm sure we can't consider this the same thing when we're looking at ancient skulls or ancient bones.
Like, look at the nuchal crest area, there is none.
Oh, yeah.
Look at the master process. There really is none.
There's a little thing here, but yeah, it's not much. Look at that. It's pretty small.
Yeah.
It's a little long. He does have a kind of brow, though. Definitely's got a little bit of a brow. But yeah, the hair is amazing. That you can actually see, and of course these have been colored. Like I'm not sure how CT scans work in the sense, but like certain elements are being colored to show the difference between flesh and bone, and obviously sarcophagus. But also it's so interesting. There's so much headspace in here. It's so weird. Thank you, Mark, for pulling up the picture. If anyone wants the blown up picture, you can look at, I think that's actually the scholarly article. I should have linked that. So if anybody wants to actually read the full article, ow, sorry, my hair is.
Here it is.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, if anybody wants to read the full article, because obviously this only came out in December, so there were a lot of news articles about it, but I very quickly found the actual scholarly article and I was like, I need this. I don't want this to like go behind a paywall. Density. Oh, thank you, Cade, and thank you, Science. Color is based on material density for absorbing X-rays. Thank you, Charlie and Scientist and Cade. That's perfect. So yeah, you could see certain areas where it's more dense. All right, let's see. Okay. So again, I didn't have full pictures, so I'll be repeating some of these pictures later. But let's look at age estimation first. After the first X-ray, which I'll remind you is in 1932, which somebody correct me when X-rays were invented, that's pretty new. Madame Curie she was late 1800s, right? Maybe early 1900s. That's what I thought too, Maddie. So 1932 is still pretty recent in the X-ray field.
1895.
1895. So yeah, 30 years. We're talking 30 years. Thank you, Ashley. Ashley's just got it too. We're talking 30 years after the X-ray was invented. They did an X-ray of the mummy. And he was determined to be 40 to 50 years old. And I have absolutely no evidence as to how they determined this. That's another. I will put that out there. No idea how they determined this. The second X-ray, which they did in 1967, they lowered it exponentially to around 25 years old. Again, actually, so I don't know how they estimated it in 1932, but in 1967 they were basing that on the condition of his teeth. which, as Mark said, when you get to a certain point, age estimation by teeth is a little hard to go by, which is probably why the age is so young, I would presume. Also, if you guys remember, our estimations are that he rose to the throne at 21. And I should have written down when he reigned, what the years of his reign were, which of course are, 1525 to 1504 are the estimated years. So that is 19 years. 19 years? Yeah. No, 21 years. 21 years. So, if we presume that he rose to the throne at 21, 25 doesn't really make sense. But I'll just put this out there. Egyptologists, dating is not our strong suit. And I think we try really hard to have a very concise, this guy died then, and then this guy started his reign then, and he reigned till this, and this was his age. Like, I think we try a little hard to get it very precise, and I think that bites us in the butt a lot, because then we find out things like, oh wait, this guy was not as old as we thought he was. He couldn't have reigned from this time to this time. So I think we needed them to be a little bit more vague. 1935 x-rays are magic beams that were completely not harmful and with rainbows of joy and no safety concerns whatsoever. X-ray in shoe shops so they could measure their feet. That's insane. That's amazing. I kind of like that a lot. All right. So, Mark, would you remind us about the parts of the body that are mainly used in age estimation, which of course are vague and wondrous?
So you have the suture closures, which I didn't talk about.
In your brain,
you have,
or in your skull. In your skull.
Up here. You have your dental eruption, which is what you're seeing on the left-hand picture.
Mm-hmm.
You have the fusion of the long bones.
Mm-hmm.
You have dental wear. You have pubic symphysis, which I did not talk about because that's really hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
You have the auricular surface. And that's about it.
That's about it.
And then what I just looked up is, I don't think you mentioned it. I don't know. We'll see. So the original age estimation was 35 years plus or minus 9.4 years based off of the pubic symphysis. So I'm assuming that's where they got the 40 to 50 year range.
Oh, that's a big plus or minus. Dang.
That's the bad thing about the pubic symphysis and the auricular surface, and really almost any of the major age estimations, is that there's a huge gap.
Mm-hmm. So
that's where I'm pretty sure that's where they got the earlier age range.
Yeah. So the image that we have on the right is this recent CT scan of the pubis symphysis of Amenhotep I. And so based off this and based off of a couple other factors, so they based this on the closures of the epiphysis of all the long bones, as well as the morphology on the surface of the pubis symphysis. And they estimated this to be around 35. I think there was a plus or minus, but I did not write that down. I printed out the article so I could read it. Because I put all the images there and then I forgot to put captions and I was like, I'm not going to remember what any of these things are. But yeah, so this is the pubis symphysis, which is on the pubic bone, and based off of this, which obviously it's not blurry on the real CT scan, this is just the image that they had in the article. Based on this service, they thought it was 4. I think they said it was a stage 4, corresponding to 35.2 plus or minus 9.4 years. So yeah, they've come up with 35, which is a little bit slightly more reasonable based off of the times of his reign and what we're estimating how old he was when he began ruling. All right. He also had a complete set of teeth, including all of his third third molars. And based off of this, and I'm not good at teeth, these teeth are bad. These teeth are jacked up. Look how short the two front teeth are. And, like, supposedly his jaw would have been, like, his jaw isn't open because he's mummified. He's wrapped up. But there is a very large gap between where his teeth should hit. And I'm worried that that might be because they've all worn down. These are very short. But yeah, apparently no abscesses, though. Apparently no abscesses.
So I just posted a link from the resources, and it's the age estimation. If you scroll all the way down, I actually did put the pubic symphysis on here, even though I didn't talk about it. And I don't know why I didn't save the male and female. I put one as male, one as female. The top one's male. But you can see what it should look like on category 4. So it's like more smooth.
Yeah. All right. So now we don't really need a sex estimation. And I will say this is not always with mummies. Sometimes you do. In this case, we didn't really need a sex estimation, because he was purely labeled Amenhotep I. And so this was just more of a confirmatory sex estimation. But I will also mention there was a lot of coffin reuse. So a lot of times somebody would use a coffin and they would make a coffin for themselves. Being a female person, they would make a female presenting coffin with female names, female pronouns in the text. And then sometime later, someone would throw out the body and another ancient Egyptian would go inside of it. And this happened in ancient Egypt, but then this also happened in more modern Egypt when the black market were selling mummies on to other people, and to Europeans and to Americans. And they frequently would pair coffins with mummies. Including a hysterically, like, kind of just was meant to be. There's this American man who did a mummy unwrapping in New York City, and he was claiming that this was the mummy of a priestess of Hathor or something or other, and he publicly unwrapped her, which was a very common thing, unfortunately, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and entirety of the 1800s. And when they unwrapped it in front of about 100 people, that mummy had a penis, and they were like, what happened? And he almost pretty much got discredited because of it, but he still continued to do stuff. He got discredited in New York, and kind of became a laughingstock in the newspaper, which I think is deserving. But thanks, I hate it. Oh, sorry, Maddie, about the ad. I keep forgetting that the ads are going. But as you can see with the CT scan, he does have a penis, and it was individually wrapped. Ashley. Thank you, Ashley, for gifting a sub to Maddie so she doesn't have to watch ads. Ashley just does this to everybody. You're too nice, Ashley. I love you. Oh my goodness. The lady had a peep. Thank you so much, Science, for the 100 bits. Thank you so much. I just meant letting people know that I had an ad cut in. It's totally fine, Maddie. Ashley loves gifting subs. She does it too much. But thank you, Science. I hope you're enjoying the lecture. Okay, so... also, for a fun fact, if anybody wanted to know, Amenhotep I was circumcised. And somebody had asked me about this earlier, if this was a common practice in ancient Egypt, and I think I said no, because I didn't really know anything. I did do some research. It actually, I wouldn't say it was 100% huge, totally commonplace, but it was done in ancient Egypt, because we have evidence, obviously, on mummies, and then we also have some pictorial evidence of the circumcision process. It's in one of the tombs, I think from the Middle Kingdom or the New Kingdom. But yeah, if anybody was interested. But all right, so this is, we're gonna look at this picture later, but this is obviously his chest cavity, and you can see there is a lot of trauma that we will talk about when it comes to his poor hand and his arm. You are right, Mark. Herodotus did write it because of cleanliness. I have no evidence if Herodotus is right, because we don't we don't listen to Herodotus half the time. I can't remember if it was Herodotus or Manetho, but one of them wrote that the ancient Egyptians, if a cat died, like if a house cat died, the entire family would shave all their heads, and if a dog died, the entire family would shave their entire body. And I don't care if it's true or not. It just proves to me that the ancient Egyptians worshipped or loved their dogs more than their cats, and so that'll just like keep my thesis like going and running, that the ancient Egyptians loved their dogs more than their cats. Yeah, I think you're right, Charlie. I think it was eyebrows and head. I think it was eyebrows and head, and then it was everything. Yeah, it doesn't seem like there was any religious significance to circumcision, because I feel like, I hate to say it, ancient Egyptians were super religious. They wrote all of their religious shit on the wall. If it was religious, it would have been everywhere. They would have been talking about it forever. It only really appears, I think, once or twice in like in pictures. So I would say it's probably more of a just cleanliness practice. All right. So the mummification process, it's hard to see, but they were able to tell some things through the CT scans. If you can see here, the brain was not removed. Although this was the standard typically in mummification, to remove the brain through the sinus, which actually you can kind of see here where it would have been removed. By the 18th dynasty, I think they were getting a little lazy, and so they just kind of let it dry up in there. But they would pack the nose with linen to kind of seal anything up, and typically the brain would just eventually dry up and would sit literally. This shows you that the mummy was lying on its back, because the brain eventually settled in the back of the skull cavity. But there also is this is a side angle of his chest, this being his spine here. This is all the layers of linen, if you can see that, which is amazing that you can actually see it. And these are actually his hand kind of coming across his body. And where you can see kind of this, he has a very like deep chest kind of opening. His kind of entire chest wall is kind of sunken in together. And he has no viscera, so no internal organs were left inside of his body. Presumably they would have all been removed and put into canopic jars. During even later periods, they would be removed, mummified, and then packed into a little package, and then packed back into the body. But at this point, they were still leaving them totally out. And his chest, kind of back here behind his ribs, were also stuffed with linen. Especially linen that had then dried resin, that they poured kind of resin over it to kind of seal everything together. So let us talk about some of the injuries on his body. I will start with, they did not determine a cause of death. They did not find anything that was super obvious as any sort of cause of death, and because we can't do like a full formal autopsy, we don't really have anything to kind of say. Most of the injuries on the body are suspected to be antemortem, which means after death, and these are either thought to be from the actual mummification process or from then possible looting after the process. So, I think if I actually go back to the skull, you might be able to see this. I think this is his C4 and C5. I'm very bad at remembering the numbers of vertebrae, but it starts from the top, doesn't it, Mark? Does it? Your axis.
C1.
Yeah.
5.
Yeah, so he has a total decapitation at C4 and C5, which I think is right. That I think that's it. Because that looks very separated. But I want to looking at the captions of these pictures. Okay. Fractured cervical spine with malrotation of the lower 3 cervical vertebrae, and there is a linen band treated with resin wrapped around the cervical spine and then fixed to the detached head. So that's what this kind of is that indicates that at one point his head was literally detached from his body, and he did I say antemortem means before death? I'm so sorry. I literally should know that because I use anti at work all the time and I always forget which one it is, and I wrote it down, and yeah, postmortem, excuse me. This is why I'm not a forensic anthropologist, because I cannot remember the difference between those. But this indicates that at one point his head was detached from his body and then somebody repaired it. So that either means that his head was detached after his death but before his mummification, or after his mummification and before the repacking by the priests of the 21st dynasty. It definitely does not seem that it happened close after death, so it most likely is a process of the looting, and unfortunately looters would get a little violent and they would kind of rip the body apart to get any sort of amulets or any sort of jewelry off of the body, and that's most likely what happened in this case. His feet are extremely disarticulated, and they actually had to attach this wooden board with these nails that you can see how dense they are, and they actually had to attach this just to keep kind of his feet kind of together. He also has his right hand is dislocated. You can see where it should have been back over here. His left arm is dislocated. You can see at the elbow. 2 fingers from the left hand are found in the abdomen. They're down here, I believe, where this arrow is. The pubic bone from his pelvis was broken, and then again his feet were disarticulated as well. Yeah, he definitely had some foot issues for sure. So again, some of these injuries were actually repaired by the embalmers or the priests of the 21st dynasty. We had the resin-coated linen bandages around the neck. We had the disarticulated parts of the arms were actually wrapped like to the body, and then pins were even attached to the left arm to kind of keep it in the right place. I think that's actually pointing out there. Let me see if there's anything else. Ooh, I'm flipping through it. And again, this is looking at it cross-eyed, and these are the extra fingers right here. These are the 2 fingers that are disarticulated. Unfortunately, we do not know. Nothing was evident in the CT scan for a cause of death, and usually that means that it was something that did not affect the bones or the body in like a present way. Like it could have been any sort of disease or any sort of I mean, what you're not going to be able to tell via CT, especially, well, the other thing is all of his organs are gone. So if he had if he had pneumonia, you should maybe even be able to see if he had fluid on the lungs or fluid around the heart or something, but all the internal organs are removed. So, yeah, as Charlie just said, like, he might have died of some sort of infection that ravaged all of his organs, but the organs are removed and they don't leave any evidence on the rest of the flesh in the body. Why are mummification techniques kept as secrets? I think that might be a little bit of a misnomer. It's not that they were essentially kept as a secret. They were just passed down to only the people that would use them. Normal ancient Egyptian people wouldn't need to know the mummification techniques. We know because we have found documents of them, of how they most likely occurred. We still don't know everything, but we know a good amount of it. But was that trauma or some kind of muscular issue or disease? Most of these, we don't have any evidence. Most of it seems like this is trauma, but this is trauma that happened after death, so it had absolutely nothing to do with his death. And so it's essentially, because as Mark mentioned, if there is trauma and the person lives even a little bit longer than actually the trauma, you would see some sort of repairing of the bone and healing of it. And all of these dislocations and breaks, there's no indication that he had any time to regrow it, which means he was probably already dead when it happened. Ugh, okay. The last thing is, I just wanted to say that this mummy, even though he was looted, he was then rebuilt essentially and re-mummified with all of the blessings of the priests from the 21st dynasty. And so there were several items on his body, including amulets. This is one tiny little amulet that they're pointing out. This is a chart of all the amulets and all the different places, but I'll quickly read them out. There were 30 different amulets found on his body, faience and gold eyes of Horus, faience scarabs, different gold beads, a serpent head made out of fired clay, and a girdle with 34 gold beads. And I'll show you. There's his girdle, which is so freaking cool. I don't know why they use the word girdle, because I think the word girdle, like, means something different, at least in modern time. It's a belt. I think it's a belt. I don't know what else to say about it. But it's just a long string of gold beads around his back. I'm pretty sure this is his back. But yeah. We can make him better than he was. Better, stronger, faster. I mean, Maddie, you joke, but that's exactly what they were trying to do. If the ancient Egyptians believed that you essentially were zombified, essentially you needed your body to wake up and walk around the afterlife, you had to make sure your body was in perfect peak condition. And so if they saw that, like, and this is like so sad to think about, but this happens all the time, that we find all of these embalmers and people who mummified the body were repairing things. So it essentially means that, like, sometime between the death and between the time that the body got to the mummification tent, his arm fell off or his neck snapped or something. I'm like, oh my god, it's just like so terrible to think of. But they're like, okay, we got to put some pins in here, we got to wrap him up, we got to make sure that he is one whole body. And that's essentially what they did. That is the reason for mummification. The reason for mummification is so that the body is in perfect peak condition, so that they can wake up and go along their life in the afterlife. All right. So, all in all, this is a very great example of mummification. Very high quality embalming and very, very high quality repairing of a body to be re-mummified. We are lucky in the fact that this mummy was not unwrapped, so that we actually have an intact royal mummy, and hopefully this study will help expand the range of mummy studies and bioarchaeology. Anybody else got any questions? Because that's the end of the lecture. And it took me forever to find a GIF that I liked about what we could do for questions. And if anybody follows me on TikTok, I will be making 3 TikToks about that entire lecture. This is literally, I just took all from the notes of the TikTok because I haven't had time to film that. How do you tell the difference between an injury after death versus killed the guy? Thank you, silly girl. Well, Mark, you want to answer that?
So anytime that you have an injury before death, if it's far enough before death, then you'll have some type of remodeling on the bone. So the bone will heal itself.
Mm-hmm.
If it's something that happens perimortem or around the time of death, it won't have any healing at all. And then if you have something that happened after death, especially if it's, for instance, a grave that has soil, if it has a break on it, it'll have a different coloration on the break.
Good. Yes. Correct. And obviously these things are very hard to tell by CT scan and X-ray. X-ray, you'd probably have a higher chance, I would say, than a CT, although people who read CT scans are so specialized in their own field. Like they see things that I think probably a normal person or even an academic person can't see. But X-rays, I think there is a good chance that you can see the line if something has begun to reheal. Like I think there might be a chance that you could see like that line where it's started to reheal. Would the re-mummifying mean rewrapping? Because that would mean he was unwrapped, just not in modern times. Yes, most likely. He was most likely entirely rewrapped. But essentially that when most of these mummies would have been found, they would have been already exposed to the elements because of the looting. Most of the times when you find a mummy, okay, I know this is Indiana Jones and this is not an Indiana Jones movie that anybody likes, but if you think of the fourth movie of Indiana Jones, when they're in the burial room of the Spanish conquistadors, there's the guy and all of them are all nicely wrapped up, and then there's one guy who is totally cut, like the wrappings are totally just cut open. Mark, it does exist. You can't ignore it. If you ignore the aliens, it's a great movie. I will fight to the day I die that like some parts of that movie are good. Not the whole. And the villain is amazing. I will fight for that because the villain is amazing. Yes. Charlie, Mark's being sarcastic because he hates the movie. But
it makes zero sense. Aliens.
It makes zero sense. I know, but like lots of stuff I love about it. I love Shia LaBeouf. I love Marion, and I love the villain. It's great up until they do full-blown aliens. I will always argue that. But if you kind of picture that, literally these mummies would be lying in their sarcophagus and the looters would have just tore their bandages off. And so they would have been totally naked and exposed. So
Actually, I can't hear it.
I know you can't hear it. I'm sorry. It's actual cannibal Shia LaBeouf. Actual cannibal Shia LaBeouf. He is an actual cannibal. But yeah. So although yes, technically what the 21st Dynasty priest did was probably a little unethical, in their life it was the most religious and sacred thing that they could do. Essentially, they were believing that they were saving the lives of all of these pharaohs who they believed probably did not enter the afterlife because they were looted and because they were destroyed. So they were doing their best, and they definitely did not try the hardest because of the mismatching and mislabeling and stuff, but they did a decent job. Unfortunately, it does seem in some cases they just moved them back. That they did not rewrap them, they just moved them. Thank you so much, Osteological, for the 2 biddies. I tell myself it's a comic book movie. Yeah. I mean, the thing about it is, as an archaeologist, I tell myself that Indiana Jones is not real anyway. And so the suspension of disbelief is like, okay, yeah, like, okay. Yeah, obviously there's not an entire ancient but modern native civilization in, where are they, Peru, that just like is living in this area that nobody can access. That's obviously not true. We would have discovered it by now. So